Yeah, sure.
Okay, dah.
series datang pada kemenangan ini.
Before we start the conference, we would like to invite Izzat Burhan to recite a prayer.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Of Allah, most merciful, all praise is due to Allah the Almighty, the cherisher, the sustainer of the world. May peace and mercy of Allah be upon His Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his family, his companions, and his followers. Ya Allah, make us with guidance, inspire us with piety, give us success for that which is most pleasure, keep us most humble, and employ us in what is most pleasing to you. Ya Rahman, Ya Rahim, make us enjoy moderation, bless us among people of right behavior, guide right conduct, and the right disciplines. For Allah, you are the knower of what we hide, the hearer of our voices, giver to life all that, and unto you praise us supplicated. We ask to you to bestow upon us beneficial knowledge and fruitful work and faith. Give us your blessings to our conference today, as well as the proceedings of the second Nation Summit of Australia 2014. We humbly pray to you, the Almighty, that we will successfully be able to achieve the noble objectives of this occasion in promoting the unity among Asian students in Australia, creating a deeper insights, analytical skills, and leadership with conscience in facing the emerging realities that will benefit and enhance the social economy and development of our country directly or indirectly. ربنا ظلمنا أنفسنا وإن لم تغفر لنا وترحمنا لنكن من الخاسرين وقنا عذاب النار وقنا عذاب النار صلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم سبحان رب العزة عما يصفون والسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله.
Thank you, Izzat, for the lovely prayer recitation. Assalamualaikum and greetings. I bid to Yang Muhammad Khairi Jamaluddin. Datuk Paduka Mariam Ade, Datuk Ramis Yahya, Dr. Ramis Yahya, Dr. Juliaki Ismail, Mr. John Mahmud American, Datuk Azmil Haji Nawawi, Syed Ibrahim Syed No, Ms. Trisha Yo, Councillor Ong Sia Melbourne, and members of the floor. I'm Rihanna.
And I'm Omar.
And we are going to be your MCs for today. Ladies and gentlemen, the third Prime Minister of Malaysia, Tun Abdul Razak, once said, "You young people must try to do things together, things that will strengthen the unity, goodwill, and understanding of the people." With this, we would like to welcome you to the second MASA Conference 2014. Well, you know what I believe, Ahmed?
What?
Well, like a successful event like this should have like a powerful mastermind behind this. So, just to kick it off, I'm going to invite the Director of MASA Conference, Mr. Arif Hamad, just to give a word or two. Please give him a round of applause.
Assalamualaikum and greetings I bid to Yang Muhammad Khairi Jamaluddin, Datuk Paduka Marina Mahathir, Dr. Ramis Yahya, Dr. Juliaki Ismail, Mr. Johan Mahmud American, Syed Ibrahim Syed No, Mrs. Trisha Yo, all the VIPs, sponsors, and last but not least, the members of the floor. Firstly, I would like to congratulate for all the participants today for taking the time and resources for being present today to share your discourse with the Malaysian leaders of today. Thank you. Dear students, it's not easy to organize the largest Malaysian conference in Australia. One must be mentally prepared to jump through all the hurdles and defy all the odds. So it's true what the MC Rihanna said just now. Behind every successful event, there is a powerful mastermind behind it. However, I would like to add a bit on her statement. It is my belief that behind every successful event, there must be and should be a solid team to support and execute the mastermind's plan. And I am forever grateful to have such supportive team members, especially my co-director of the second MASA conference, Mr. Akif, for his relentless commitment towards this project. The second MASA conference team has achieved a new mileage for Malaysian student intellectual discourse by masterminding a platform for both current leaders and future leaders to exchange intellectual ideas on Malaysia as a nation. It is not often we get to constructively collaborate with youth on national issues, and we greatly appreciate this opportunity. Members of the floor, relating to our team today, Wawasan or Vision 2020 is a set of goals and vision by the former Prime Minister Tun Dr. Mahathir Mohamad, who created 9 challenges, of which Malaysia as a nation was to achieve by year 2020. The challenges include both social and economic development nation. So, as a student leader now, representing MASCA, I would use this chance to promote unity. People will unite usually when they have same goal to achieve something. For example, I'm a football fan, so I'm going to use football as an example. So the legendary club Manchester United is struggling this season. So breaking so many bad records and for their underperformance. They used to be so fearless and win everything they have entered. But this one season they not perform, everyone suddenly forget. So, especially the haters. Now it is tough time for the Manchester United fans, and they are breaking apart, start to blame the manager, players, and etc. So, as a student, what I can learn from that is there will be some tough time where our unity will be tested. Whether be the unity to support our football club or unity among our student associations and unity in our nation. So we students are not only made for classroom and textbooks. We have a major role to play to aid the country to achieve these goals. You, despite how insignificant or how much of a nonsense you have been told you are by the older generations, you are the key towards a more socially, intellectually, and economically developed Malaysia. So let us all now move forward, improve ourselves to become the agent of change for a better man. So I hope you make the most of this conference as the speakers will do so. So, Malaysia boleh.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera, salam satu Malaysia. Very good morning to all of you. Yang bahagia Datuk Dr. Rani Zahir, Councillor General of Malaysia to Melbourne, Councillor Ong from the City of Melbourne, distinguished speakers, ladies and gentlemen, of course Johan and Arif, two prime movers behind MASCA and also MASA, and to all of you this morning. I'd like to start by congratulating the Malaysian Students' Council of Australia, or MASCA, for holding this second MASCA Summit. It's extremely encouraging to see young Malaysians with this kind of drive and sense of purpose. I'm glad to be here and I expect more things, more great things, to come from MASCA in the near future. On August 31st, 1957, when Tengku Abdul Rahman declared the lands that made up Peninsular Malaya as forever a sovereign, democratic, and independent state, founded upon the principles of liberty and justice, and ever seeking the welfare and happiness of its people, and the maintenance of a just peace among all nations, we ushered not only independence, but a promise to the nation, one that would include Sabah and Sarawak in 1963. That is a nation committed to freedom and justice. By this, it was meant that we gave our citizens equal protection under the law and guaranteed their fundamental rights as citizens and protected their God-given dignity. This promise was reiterated under our second Prime Minister, Tun Abdul Razak, who crafted a national ideology, the Rukun Negara, which in its preamble, among other things, called for preserving a democratic way of life, creating a just society where the prosperity of the country can be enjoyed together in a fair and equitable manner, and guaranteeing a liberal approach towards our rich and varied cultural traditions. These are not just mere words. These are the foundations of our nation. These are the careful considerations given by our forefathers at the inception of our nation, pledging to commit themselves and future generations to a path that would create a united nation for all Malaysians. I strongly believe that everyone who commits themselves to public office in Malaysia must hold steadfast to these ideals, for they are the cornerstone of the very circumstances in which Malaysia can survive and thrive. Without justice, liberty, and a commitment to the well-being of every Malaysian, there will be those who will feel oppressed or marginalized, whether it be political oppression or economic marginalization. That feeling can quickly turn into a combustible mix of anger and rebellion and fuel the flames of instability, something a relatively young democracy and economy like Malaysia can ill afford. Without a liberal approach spoken in the Rukun Negara, which in spirit reflects the progressive and moderate political philosophy of the Najib administration, we risk being held hostage to forces of extremism in our own political system at home. These extremists, whether their cause is religious fanaticism or ethnic chauvinism, are the very forces that seek to divide us as a people. They exist everywhere, on both sides of the political divide, and in the middle, on the fence as well. I know the Prime Minister has committed himself to defeat these forces, as have I in my relatively shorter political career. It is this place that we occupy in politics, the center, the centrist path, if you will, that must be expanded and shared by many, many others. The center is the only logical place for a Malaysia committed to the ideals of our founding fathers, immortalized in the words that I recounted earlier in our proclamation of independence and also in the Rukun Negara. It is a place within the spectrum of ideologies and ideas which I hope you will come to occupy as well, regardless of which political side you take. I say this because, as I said earlier, the forces of extremism exist on both sides of politics. It exists in my side of politics, among those that use ethnicity as a political creed of supremacy that offends and marginalizes others. It exists in the other side, other political side, in the form of religious fanaticism and ethnic chauvinism that may be strategically hidden from view today, but which I believe is still very much present as the fundamental DNA of two of the parties that make up the opposition coalition. So this is the first thing that I wanted to speak to you about this morning. Securing the center, the middle, the moderate and the progressive path. It is to me the only choice for Malaysia. It is a path taken not without great opposition. I have to face accusations of political treason from the right wing of my party, but I persevere, as does the Prime Minister, because we believe that we must never waver in our cause. And this means not just pursuing this cause quietly. It means walking the walk when the occasion demands. It means nailing your colors to the mast for all to see. Not just quiet advocacy, but standing up and being counted at defining moments and not backing down. If one believes in Edmund Burke's phrase, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good people to do nothing. It means we cannot sit in silent disagreement when the bigots and extremists thump their chests and spew their hate. It is incumbent upon us to demonstrate that the moderate centre will not cower in fear and will not back down from a fight. When a political opponent recently passed away, some very inappropriate off-color remarks were made by certain individuals reflecting this extremist bigotry. No matter that the comments came from someone who was supposedly on my side, I had no other choice but to stand up for what I believe to be right. I believe that in that very moment, I needed to stand up for everything that I had been preaching about, moderation and the progressive foundation of our great nation, by unequivocally and directly telling that voice of hatred to shut up and to keep his bigotry to himself. It is times like these when we must speak up and fight, because not fighting is not good enough. Silence will be seen as acquiescence, and silence today will erode that very center that we hold dear and will allow forces of extremism to tear apart our society. Ladies and gentlemen, the other thing that I want to talk to you this morning is that as young people, you need to keep an open mind. This is something I touched on yesterday when I met a smaller group of students. Young Malaysians should keep their options open and not rush to believe one side or another. One of the beauty about being a student is that you should expose your minds to a multitude of thinking and ideologies. This is a time for ideals and activism. And while ideals and activism should continue to burn in you and guide you in your later years, this is the time for you to listen, learn, and figure things out for yourselves. Don't allow others to think for you, and don't allow others to dictate what you should or should not accept or believe. The state and your parents have not spent all this money on you to create young minds that are only ready for blind acceptance and regurgitation. We expect you to think for yourselves and not privatize your thinking to others. That means listening to both sides, politically. Don't jump to any sort of summary judgment either way, simply because it is fashionable to do so, or because that's what your friends are doing, or because that's what your parents told you to do. This is an important message for me to convey as a representative of the current government. It's fashionable to be anti-establishment and reject everything the present government does. I too was anti-establishment at university. But I didn't dismiss everything outright. I gave everyone a fair hearing and decided on an issue based on the facts and arguments presented. If you look at our country through prejudiced eyes, it can only give you a self-fulfilling vision that is partisan and one-sided. But if you look at issues through reasoned and rational lenses, consistent with that timeless virtue that everyone deserves to be heard, then you will be enriching democracy by making choices based on sound judgment and careful consideration. It is easy to support what appears to be popular, but really is populist. It is easy to be riled up by tales of political deceit, even though there is little evidence presented. And it's easy to continue to blame one side out of hatred and ignore the shortcomings of those you may be biased towards. Let me take those points one by one and give specific examples. Firstly, this government, my government, believes we need to do what is right, and that sometimes what is right is not what is popular. This is difficult because we are against opponents who peddle in populism. They never tell you how they will pay for their populism, apart from plucking figures that they can save this, that, and the other from the air. The government cannot play that game because we are in the business of serious governing, not in the magical world of opposition populism. We have to make tough calls on things like subsidies and taxation, decisions that may not be initially popular. We need to cut down, for instance, on our budget deficit to signal to the international market that we are serious about fiscal responsibility, and also to ensure that we have enough financial room for maneuver in a time of real economic crisis. We need to tackle the tough issue of subsidies, moving away from blanket subsidies to targeted assistance. Blanket subsidies, for instance, disproportionately benefits those with high incomes and is a strain on the government's finances. We need to restructure subsidies so that it goes right to the right places, those in the lower income category, and to free up some of the savings from abolishing blanket subsidies to pay for key development items like a better education system for the needs of a more competitive global marketplace. We need to reform our tax system so the tax base is not so narrow. This means making a tough call on the goods and services tax, or GST. Now, you all know the key points to this. We are only one of 2 ASEAN countries that hasn't implemented the GST, and the fact that it is essentially an enhancement of an existing tax and not a new tax. The rate we have proposed for implementation is far lower than many other countries when they started implementing GST, like here in Australia. We have many essential items that are zero rated to ensure we minimize and mitigate the inflationary impact on the people. And crucially, GST goes hand in hand with our ongoing efforts to cut government spending, fight corruption, reduce wastage and leakages. Now, some of my political opponents will say cutting costs and fighting corruption must be done before you implement GST. Well, we're doing both at the same time. We need to secure our government financial position today to pay for the growth of tomorrow. And that means coming down hard on wastages. We have taken action against many public officials that have been responsible for the wastages highlighted in the Auditor General's report. And we have put in place strict integrity rules for government procurement. My ministry has just announced major privatization exercises to be done on an open tender request for proposal basis. There are no more directly negotiated deals, directly negotiated projects in this government. So all these things that the opposition say must be done before the GST is implemented are already being done. And it goes hand in hand with tax reform through the GST. Again, it may not be the popular thing to do, but this government believes that it is the right thing to do to secure our economic future. Second, it was easy to get angry after the last election. After all, many young people bought into the whole argument that Barisan Nasional won a blacked-out election aided by tens of thousands of Bangladeshi voters. And yet, where is the evidence? Where was the blackout? The so-called Bentong blackout never took place. Until today, I have not encountered a single shred of evidence that tens of thousands, let alone even one Bangladeshi, was spotted casting a vote on election day. Imagine the operations involved in flying tens of thousands of foreign illegal voters from East Malaysia, as was the accusation by the opposition leader. How many planes would that require? How many landings would that have required? It's not something that could have happened quietly without anyone noticing and taking photos in this day and age of Twitter, Instagram, and selfies. Nobody selfied with a Bangladeshi voter. Now today, the opposition are quiet about these accusations. After stirring hatred against the results, they feel they have done their job. Malaysians have been convinced that the election was stolen. It doesn't matter that there is no hard evidence, no concrete proof. What matters is that they have already created a perception. Now this is what I mean by you having to think for yourselves and think rationally and logically without emotion and prejudice. Ask for the proof. Hold everybody accountable for their statements and their accusations. Barisan, Pakatan, all of them. Hold us accountable. Think, and think for yourselves. Thirdly, be fair in your analysis, as I mentioned earlier. Do not give anyone a free pass, whether they are from my side or from the opposition. As much as you hold the federal government accountable, extend that same treatment to our political opponents, who actually now have to account for themselves at the state level. Ask tough questions of the water crisis in Selangor. How back in 2009, the Barisan Nasional federal government warned the state government that there could be severe shortages of water in 2014 if something was not done to increase the water treatment capacity in the Klang. It is on record that the Selangor Menteri Besar said that that warning was baseless and that there was more than enough water. Well, guess what? There isn't. I had to fly all the way to Melbourne for a shower. Most of the Klang Valley today has been rationing water for several weeks now, something the federal government warned more than 5 years ago, but was dismissed just like that. Ask tough questions about why that same state government sold state land, Canal City, to a private developer who then sold part of that land to another private company for a higher price than what it paid the state government. Just as you hold the federal government accountable for all our deals and all our decisions, you must do the same for the other side. That's fair. If you use the argument, as many opposition supporters do, or, this is all important, biar pun buat benda sama, Bian Bun Wat Juga, then you have just become a political machai. Blind in your hatred and hypocritical in your stand. This is what I mean by having an open mind. Today you've given me a hearing, and maybe next time someone from the opposition will speak to you. Go and listen to them. Listen for yourselves and decide. Fight that inner machai in you from taking over and clouding your judgment, forcing you to believe without thought, to support without cause, and to choose without consideration. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to end by saying two last things briefly. First of all, I'd like to say that we are at a tremendously important crossroads for our nation's future. And I touched upon this yesterday, and I'm going to give you the abridged version this morning. We grew at a fast pace in the 1980s and 1990s by positioning ourselves, just like many other Asian countries, in a wild geese formation of development, basically drawing in large sums of foreign direct investment from Japan initially, and then from the United States, by presenting ourselves as the factory of the world, where you could get cheap labor, where you could get cheap gas supply, where you could get cheap land on which to build your factories. But that time and that age has gone. We have gone past the age where we can present ourselves simply as the factory of the world. For us to survive and thrive in this century, for us to survive and thrive in this age of cutthroat global competition, it can't just be made in Malaysia. It has to be invented in Malaysia. We can't just be the factory of the world. We have to be the laboratory of the world. If we're to succeed in this day and age, we have to present ourselves not just as a destination of free or cheap labor, cheap land, cheap capital, but we have to present ourselves as a destination where people can create and innovate, where we have the best human resource and opportunity for us to move up the value chain. The day and age of us being the factory of the world is over, and it's for us to step up, make those tough decisions as far as structural reforms are concerned, because we cannot do this overnight. We cannot become the laboratory of the world overnight. We have to go back and fix our education system, and this government has rolled out an ambitious plan, the education blueprint, to give powers to our schools, to our school districts, to headmasters, to parents, to people who understand their school the best, which is those at the grassroots as opposed to some bureaucrat at the Ministry of Education. Empower our schools, reward them based on performance, fix the curriculum, reform the curriculum so that you reward creativity, innovation, and not just regurgitation of whatever you've memorized to pass the exam. That's how you create that necessary innovation to move up the value chain as opposed to just talking about it. We're doing it as far as the education system is concerned, and we're also reforming other parts of our education system, vocational studies, technical studies, as I mentioned earlier. This is the time for Malaysia to step up, and this is the time for you all to contribute to that step up by coming back eventually and by being that catalyst for change and innovation. Secondly, we have to come together and create a dominant Malaysian narrative. For far too long, I mentioned earlier, these forces of extremism on all sides are tearing our society apart. There has to be a central narrative that prevails beyond any other narrative that seeks to divide our nation apart. We are a nation that came together at birth, completely different circumstances, different backgrounds, from the peninsula, Sabah, Sarawak, those who have been on the peninsula for many years, Malays, the Orang Asli, including the Peranakan Chinese, as well as more recent immigrants in 1957. We came together to build a nation. We came together to build a common narrative together. And that narrative really needs to come forward today. What we see today still are too many parallel lines that do not meet. These parallel lines, which I've spoken about many times, and some of you have even heard me speak about it before, are parallel lines that exist between young Malaysians who do not have enough contact hours with each other. This room is full of people who manage to bend those parallel lines, come together, whether you're Malay, Chinese, Indian, Orang Asli, Kadazan, Dayak, you manage to see beyond and come together with a common narrative. But back home, there's still too many people who have not been able to bend that trajectory of the parallel lines so that they can meet in one common narrative. There are still many Malay students who go to Sekolah Kebangsaan for primary school. Never coming across a Chinese student, never coming across an Indian student, never having a meaningful interaction with somebody from another race. Then going to an all-Malay boarding school, Sekolah Asrama Penuh, where there's no Chinese person inside. Then after that, they go to university, an all-Malay university, or they go to the Middle East for university again. They don't see a Chinese person there. After coming back with a degree from Jordan, they go and end up working for Jakir. Again, no Chinese person inside. That is their parallel life. A Chinese boy was born 10 kilometers away from that Malay boy in a Chinese new village. Went to a Chinese primary school, no Malay boy inside. After that, went to a Chinese independent high school, no Malay student inside. After that, went to Taiwan to study accounting, no Malay guy inside. After that, came back, worked at the accounting department of a small private company, no Malay guy inside. After work, a Jakir Malay guy goes back, switches on Astoria. After work, Chinese guy goes back home, switches on Walatoy. Both in the parallel lines, never once meeting. And this is the problem that we have today. We have no central narrative. We have no common narrative. And these are the lines that continue to tear us up. I'm sorry about Astro. I believe I just Astro is really good right now. It's a choice that people make. And these are the lines that we have to bend. And there are many things that we can do. We tried the national service. It's worked to some extent, but not fully. Because when you send people at 18 years old to mix around with each other for 3 months, it's too late already. It's too late because they've gone past their formative years already. They've gone past the formative years and their minds are made up. I served in the National Service Council. I went to see national service, saw Malay kids, Chinese kids, Indian kids playing and having to do drills together. But I waited for recess. I waited for break time, lunchtime. Lunchtime, I wanted to see them in their natural state. And sure enough, their natural state was Malay Kampung, Chinese village, and Indian, Little India. So that was the natural state of people. When you force them to come together, they won't come together. They will still go back to their parallel lines. So we have to create this new narrative, and we have to start earlier. And this is something this government is committed to. Hopefully we can drive this. Hopefully my ministry can drive this as well. Hopefully you all can drive this. But the main thing about driving that narrative, that central narrative, is to secure the center. If we secure the center against forces of bigotry and extremism, then we create that space in which we can create the narrative and bend these parallel lines so that they can intertwine and that they can meet. Ladies and gentlemen, we need to have this conversation, and we need to have it now. There is too much good that is going for Malaysia. We have so much going for us. We are rich in resources. We are rich in our diversity. This tapestry that makes us one nation is our strength. Never ever squander that strength. Never treat it as a liability. It is what unites us and what makes us special. And with God's grace, let us work to preserve our union and secure our future together. Thank you very much.
To show our appreciation and gratitude for your attendance, we would like to offer you gifts on behalf of MASA. And for that, we would like to call out the co-director of MASA Conference, Muhammad Akif, to give away the gift. Everyone, please come up.
So, I echo your sentiment that we need to have that conversation, so I'd like to begin it right now. So, firstly, I all for empowering the centrists, but I'm afraid that the current government does not pursue a mechanism that can really generate the change to fight this religious extremism and all the extremists inside the country. Why I say that? Because it needs more than just a mere vocal condemnation from a youth minister to say, to denounce the action of Zul Nordin. What is lacking in the country is the real legal prosecution. When Utusan Malaysia says that when us, sarcastically us, apalagi Cina mahu, there is no prosecution resulting responded to that. When there is a parade back in 2009, where some community extremists bring a cow head to the temple, there is no prosecution being initiated towards these people. And more importantly, when we talk so much about eradicating the extremists, is the government of BN that allow Perkasa to participate in the election. So what I'm trying to say is, you tell that this is a government that are willing to make tough decisions when situation requires to. So I'm asking you, why the heck we still haven't prosecuted all these extremists? That's the first question. Secondly, I think you're being selective when you denounce all the claim about the election as being too generic. When you talk about the accusation of being the Bangladeshi, with all due respect, I love Bangladeshi, about Bangladeshi here in Australia. They are too proud, I'm not xenophobic. But I think you've been selectively listen to the concern of the people. There's a lot of civil society movement talking about gerrymandering. The fact that there's the electoral map in Malaysia right now is disproportionate. There is a parliamentary state like Kappa that have 130,000 voters, but Parliament said that only foster for less than 50,000 people. I understand that somehow state representation, a Borneo representation in Parliament is a good idea, but I don't think that completely disregard and abandon the population change that happened in this, for example, the process organization should be disregarded altogether. And more importantly, if you don't change the parliamentary seat right now, it's not good for the BN government, because it is effectively convenience for them, because all of the seats that have a much less voters are stronghold for BN. So I don't think that the government is really listening to this civil society movement like Kumantau and Merdeka Center. I hope I make sense, because I hope it makes sense.
Thank you very much for the question, and it's a great set of questions. And I hope that you ask as challenging questions to the opposition when they come. But let me start by saying that every part, as I said to you yesterday, we had this conversation yesterday, by the way, for everyone that wasn't there, the same conversation with him yesterday. Every party battles with extremists within their own camp. We do, the opposition does as well. And it's an ongoing fight. It's an ongoing fight, but what is important is who runs the party. It's not who dictates the party, but who runs the party and who ultimately dictates the policy of the party. Not people who are making noise, but people who actually run the party. My party is run by a president, prime minister, who doesn't hold to these views, who holds to a progressive view, or a moderate view. And we continue to battle forces and voices of extremism. Yes, we made some mistakes in the past, fraternizing with the likes of Perkasa, but we've shown that these people are not just ideological losers, but electoral losers as well. We gave one an opportunity to contest, and he lost. And I've been a critic of Perkasa from day one. I said they have absolutely no place in my political party. Absolutely no place in my alliance. I did that when I had no position. I did that when I was told stories. People say, you're crazy. You should pander to the Malay right wing so that your position in the party will be secure, because you're not the minister, nobody respects you. But I said, no, that's not the point. The point is that you have to fight for what you believe in. Even though it was at tremendous risk to my own personal position, I persevered. And now the thinking within my party is that I'm right. The Prime Minister is right. We don't need people like that. We don't need people on the right wing of the party. We're going to demonstrate to you that we're going to continue to go forward by continuing to marginalize these people. They may still be there on the extremes, on the fringes. They may still get reported by Utusan Malaysia, but that's going to change. That's going to change the more we convince our own people that moderation and the centrist path is the way to go. And as much as I respect your candor, your bravery, and your courage in asking that question, what I spoke about earlier, don't allow your own personal prejudice to cloud certain facts. And I just fact-checked this because I want to make sure that I was right. And it only takes you to consult Mr. Google to check that this is true. You spoke about the cowhead protesters. Now, I just pulled up from the Star an article from 2009 because I just remembered this. The MCA has lauded the Attorney General's decision to charge protesters responsible for bringing a cow's head to the controversial demonstration over the relocation of the Hebrew temple in Shah. You just said that they weren't charged. Mr. Google tells me they were charged. So, I mean, let's be fair. Let's be fair in our accusations. When you want to take a pot shot at a politician and say, you know, you've done nothing, there's no charge being made against people, there haven't been charges made against people. I remember this distinctly. I remember this because I spoke out against them. Even though some of them were part of UMNO, I said, no, this is absolutely wrong, and we must charge them, and we have charged them. So when it happens, you have to acknowledge that it's taken place. And, you know, try to see the music and the noise. Don't let your anger overcome you. And make sure that you look at the facts, because the facts are there to see. It's only there if you want to look for it. If you don't want to look for it, then you get carried away with your own personal prejudice. As far as delineation is concerned, yeah, fine, okay. Now you're moving away to another subject, creating a new subject. Previously, it was about the blackout, it was about the Bangladeshis, zero proof, so let's move on to something else. Now it's about delineation, shift the goalposts, change the argument, fine. Let's talk about delineation. You spoke about big constituencies in the urban areas like Kappa. I mean, my constituency, Rumbau, went from 60,000 the first time I won, 80,000 the last time I won, next time around it'll be 100,000 plus. I want to break my constituency as well. And it's not a constituency that I'll lose. It's a constituency that will probably win again. We'll win both constituencies, Rumbau and the rump of Rumbau that's broken up from Rumbau. So it's not just the opposition constituencies that need to be broken up. My constituency needs to be broken up as well. And you speak about Sabah and Sarawak as though, you know, we protect Sabah and Sarawak because it's a BN fixed deposit. It's not just about that. It's about a constitutional promise we made. It's about a promise that we made when the Union of Federation of Malaya and Sabah and Sarawak took place. The Reed Commission, when we came back to Kobo Commission, where Sabah and Sarawak said we demand at least 30% representation in Parliament at any one time, so that the voice of Sabah and Sarawak is always represented. And we can't do anything about that because Sabah and Sarawak constituencies are small. They're sparse and they're small. They're sparsely populated, 30,000 people, 40,000 people. I can't break them up anymore. If you break up that constituency to 10,000 people, it becomes ridiculous just to keep that 30%. So it's very difficult. You can't just say, oh, you know, you have to break up more constituencies unapologetically single-race parties. We are unapologetically single-race parties for the time being until we strengthen Barisan Nasional so we can be a true multiracial party. But look at experiments of so-called multiracial parties. Experiments of multiracial parties. How multiracial are they? And I'm going to swipe both sides right now. I'm going to whack both sides. I'm going to whack my side, I'm going to whack opposition side in true, to be fair. Yeah? Look at DAP. And look at Gerakan, for that matter. One on my side, one on the other side. Multiracial in constitution. Multiracial in membership, but really monoracial in reality. Absolutely monoracial in reality. You speak of a Malaysia, and yet you can't attract and you can't get the support of more than just really one community. So to me, there are problems with single-race parties, of course. Obviously there are problems with single-race parties, but at least what you see is what you get. For the other parties, what you see is not what you get. What you're told is not what you get. They claim themselves to be multiracial parties, and they're not multiracial parties. You'd be hard-pressed to find 50 Malay guys in the AP. You'd be hard-pressed to find 50 Malay guys in Gerakan as well. So they're not reaching out. So a multiracial platform really doesn't mean anything unless you really try and strive for it. And by that same token, if you ask about multiracial parties, or monoracial parties, single-race parties, we can ask the same thing about schools. We can ask the same thing about single-race schools, or schools based on vernacular language, or schools that are based on one ethnicity alone. And this is Chinese schools, Indian schools, your MRSMs, your UITM. We can ask about that as well. That also solidifies these parallel lines, not just politics. That creates people to look at things through a certain dimension, a certain lens. So when I talk about schools, for instance, I said, can we have a new referendum, a new social contract to change this? Can we have one national school system, for instance, where everybody goes to the same school? Now, of course, when I said this, a Chinese community, Indian community got upset. So I said, no, what I meant is, what if we get rid of vernacular schools, and we also get rid of all these Malay schools? Malay, MASA, UiTM, all that stuff. And at the end of the day, everyone got mad at me. But that's what we have to do, to dream big reforms that can change these parallel lines. Now, I will continue to say, I'll continue to be fair in saying that we need a single approach where everyone is willing to give up something. Only then will you be able to bend those parallel lines. So, coming back to your question, it's not just about political parties. It's about how we see ourselves. It's about schools. This hall is extremely rare in Malaysia. You don't get this mixed crowd in Malaysia. And even in this mixed crowd, I can see that it's bunched up as well. I can see that it's big bunched up as well. But this doesn't happen. You go to Malaysia, racial polarization happens not because of political parties, but because of how Malaysians see themselves. When you ask the average Malaysian, do you really have a real friend that is not from your ethnic community? They'll say, yeah, I have a real friend, but it's actually their colleague or their classmate. Not somebody that they go to, they have a problem. Not somebody that they really hang out with. The things that you see in the 1960s and 70s, my parents growing up telling stories about real friendship between Malaysians, hardly exists anymore outside of MASA, outside of, So it's something that we need to change. It's not just about political parties, it's about society, it's about education system. What are we going to do about it? Well, I started off by saying, look, in UMNO Youth, Barisan National Youth, we have to start projecting ourselves as BN and not just our component parties. After all, when we contest an election, it's not as UMNO, MCA or MIC, it's as Barisan National. So don't behave like Barisan National only during the elections, come together, but do that all the time. So many of our programs, we branded it under BN Youth, no more UMNO Youth. UMNO Youth sometimes, but more BN Youth. And we want to try and get that cooperation going. Because I feel, after having led UMNO Youth, BN Youth for the last 5 years, when we come together as BN Youth, we tend to have a better moderate stand on issues, because we have to consider everyone in the room. But if it's just us, UMNO, MCA, MIC, we tend to have a more exclusivist stand. So to be inclusive, we have to hang out with each other more, we have to make more collective decisions together. And if that leads towards one single party in the future, then I'm happy, because that's really what we do.
Allow us to have another question. So this is a wrap for the first session with YB. Again, guys, please give a round of applause.
Firstly, a very good morning to all of you, and thank you for inviting me. It's an honor to be here. Also thanks to the Malaysia Australia Student Council, MASA, and any of the officials back from home, from Malaysia. So, very good morning to all of you. Vision 2020 was something that many of us grew up with, and it's something that we, as primary school students, we would paint murals on the wall saying Vision 2020. I remember very fondly of 1998 during the Commonwealth Games, where some of you were probably still in primary school, but in secondary school we were singing along with Ella's song, Standing in the Eyes of the World. And we were very positive, we were very optimistic about the future, it was just about 20 years to come. And we thought that, yes, we would surely get there, because it's such a long time from now. And I think, to answer your question, Vision 2020, yes, we have come a very long way, so we need to give ourselves a pat on the back for that. We moved up, for example, to the 6th position in the World Bank's Doing Business Index. We're classified as a highly developed nation in the UNDP's Human Development Index. So we've done quite well on some of these international rankings. But I think where we haven't done so well is being able to express that in terms of our own society. Part of Vision 2020 2020 talks about a democratic nation. I understand that a member of opposition was actually invited to be here, and that invitation was actually withdrawn. Now, I don't really know what happened behind the scenes, and I'm sure there were very many difficult decisions that MASA had to make. But I think it's displays like that which do not demonstrate our honesty and integrity on the part of a country that is seeking to become regionally and internationally viable. YB in the morning very sturdily said that this is the time for university students to be intellectually debating on things that maybe you don't disagree with, maybe which are unpalatable, but it's small acts of demonstration like this which sometimes reflect upon our ability to compete economically as well. Some other things are, for example, the fact that our Gini coefficient, which is a measure of inequality, has kind of hovered around 0.43 over the last few years. The Gini coefficient, I think many of you study economics, you know that the closer you are to 1, the more unequal it is. And the fact that we haven't actually moved from that shows that perhaps we have a bit of an unequal distribution of wealth in society. We have the bottom 40% of Malaysians earning, less than 2,000 ringgit or less than 2,500 ringgit a month. And if that's the average of income, the fact that in Sabah and Sarawak, some people don't even have access to electricity. I met with an officer from the Ministry of Education last week, and he was talking about this tiny village in Sabah, which has no electricity, no internet, no radio, no TV, and you think, how can one actually survive with all those things? But the fact is that there are villages in the East Malaysia which still do not have access to these things. So I think, yes, well, on one hand, international investors, we do quite well, but if you kind of look under the veneer and under the layers of society, under the layers of these wonderful indices, there are still many areas that we can improve on. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Trisha. And you spoke about international, how we're going along on the international level based on the international indices. But on a closer look, there are discrepancies between those indices and what's actually going on right now. What do you think about this,
Yeah, hi. Well, first, Assalamualaikum and a very good morning to everyone. Actually, I must confess, when I was first invited and they said they're going to get a room full of hundreds of students, and it's like, I think, holiday for most of you, and it's first thing in the morning, I actually sort of expressed disbelief. So I'm actually I think it's really awesome that all of you have come on this morning to listen to, shall we say, not exactly the most fun topic, but some serious stuff. So I think first, a round of applause to everyone. Just congratulations. Let me digress a bit, because the opening speech, there was some mention of Manchester United. So maybe just want to just check, right? So how many Man U fans do you have in this hall? Semangat semua. Okay, Liverpool fans? Okay, alright. Okay. I established one alignment with very good. Okay, that's a very good sign. I don't know. Chelsea. Maybe let's go a bit more. Let's try a bit more. West Ham. No way. Aston Villa. Newcastle. Okay. Okay. I wasn't just asking for fun, and maybe I want to have an opportunity just to respond to your first question in terms of where are we in terms of on our road to Vision 2020. And there is, I think, a link to football, as everything in life probably has a link to football, but that's another story altogether. Now, if you want to, I guess, liken us, we're as I think I first want to broadly agree with Trisha. The glass is half full. I think that's basically the key message that Trisha shares. I will broadly agree with that. On one hand, we're a very successful country, and I think no one should, even even question that for a moment. We're a relatively young country of 50 plus years. For those who, I don't know, how many people do economics? Maybe just get a sense of it. Okay, for those of you who are interested in economics or do economics, I suggest this report called the Growth Commission Report. It was done around 2000 and basically looked at all the countries in the world, and they put Malaysia as one of just a select group of 13, only 13 countries that have successfully shown consistent growth over a period of more than 2 decades, and consistent high growth, more than 7%, over at least 2 decades in the post-World War II period. So that's the good news, right? We're one of a very select few countries that have been very successful. And when you think of when Vision 20 was first announced in 1990, the country then was full of confidence. So think of us like a football club that's just gotten, and in the 90s we were growing at 9% on average, between 88 and 97. So the country was full of confidence and full of exuberance. Now, compare that with where we are today. Because coming back to the growth report, well, to a group of these 13 countries that have been very successful, I think under 5 of those countries only made the next step to become a high-income nation. So a lot of discussions, at least amongst economists, is Malaysia at risk of being stuck in the middle income trap? And the reason why that's also relevant is that you can think of a recently promoted English Premiership club, Cardiff City, of course, the Malaysian league. But risks of them potentially being relegated. But think again of the sort of football clubs that you guys decide to support, Manchester United, Liverpool, obviously, of course you want to be associated with such clubs. They're associated with success, associated with winning. Even for the so-called Chelsea fans, I often find Chelsea normally kira sahabat baru lah. During school, normally no one ever wanted to support Chelsea. Suddenly they got new fans. But no one would even want to support West Ham or Aston Villa because they seem to be stuck mid-table, right? It's not, easy if you're kind of like excited sikit whether can you survive the avoid relegation. So ada semangat pun in there, and then if you're in the right top table pun ada semangat. But if you're somewhere, in the middle, it's like, alamak, boring kan? I mean, you say what, get out. Because it's not very exciting. In fact, it's probably the toughest place to be when you've gone into the big league, but you're not quite there yet. So I think that's basically the issue with Vision 2020. We seem to be almost there, but we're not quite seem to be making that last mile. Now, having said that, I think so. Everyone said Vision 2020, right? Yeah. But how many of you in this hall can say the 3 objectives of the new economic model? Anyone? Anyone familiar with the GDP and its 6 NKRAs? Or the EDP and its 12 NTAs? Anyone? It's amazing, right? So you have a hall full of people who all, I think, are very familiar with Vision 2020. So like, Cardiff getting promoted to English Premiership. But now that we're sort of mid-table, like, Newcastle or Aston Villa, no one quite knows what's the strategy for getting us to the top of the Premiership table, if anyone believes that we can. And so that, I think, is a challenge. So even when I think the government articulates a plan and call it an economic model, maybe just to share with you, the 3, so I have to go for the 3 objectives because I can't remember the 9 challenges of Vision 2020. So the 3 objectives of the economic model is high income. That's a target to reach the status of developed nations, but US gross national income of 15,000 per capita. The second one is inclusiveness, and the third is sustainability. Now, on a quantitative level, we do seem to be on track for the high income target. So if we go back to about 2008, we were GNI about 6,700 US dollars per capita. 2013, we already crossed the 10,000 mark, so we're still on track to reach the 15,000 by 2020. But I think many Malaysians would, question the more qualitative aspects of Vision 2020 or the new economic model, particularly in terms of inclusiveness and sustainability. And maybe referring to the 9 challenges that we're talking about, I think a lot of the mindset issues are probably, they're called the 9 challenges, and they're definitely challenging if we're going to achieve them by 2020. And maybe coming back to this whole challenge of perhaps being a mid-table Premiership football club, there's almost a lack of interest or even lack of self-belief that we can make it. So I think
excellent. Now, John, you mentioned a lot about new economic, the Malaysia's new economic model and national transformation program. Now, there's a number of policies, government policies going on to realize this Vision 2020. Trisha, could you perhaps share your thoughts about what this economic policy entails and how these plans might based on your previous experience with the Selangor government, how these plans might make us closer to realizing Vision 2020?
Okay, there's a lot of things that I wanted to respond to Johan about, but maybe I have to push it to a bit later, especially on the new economic model, but I'll come to that. Yeah, I'll come to that later. So your question is about policy, right? So I think, first I'd like to distinguish between policy and how that policy is actually implemented. So in many dialogues, in many conferences, roundtables, things that you all are familiar with, and also things that you will attend when you enter the workforce. The very common thing everyone will say is, Malaysia has great policy, we have everything on paper, everything's all, it's done, we have all the 10 Malaysia plan, thick documents like that, but the fault always lies in the implementation, so this is what you will hear. And yes, that is true that we do not spend enough time talking about how the policy is actually going to be implemented, but I think what we also forget to talk about is that the implementation process needs to be incorporated into the policy itself. So, for instance, people say that the new economic policy was very sound when it was started in 1971, and surely it was of great, it was a very noble policy because it was meant to correct the differences between equity held in society, the inequality that I talked about earlier. And people will always say that it's because of bad implementation that the NEP did not work. So I want to ask the question, is it the policy itself that was inherently wrong and therefore destined to fail? Or was it because policymakers were implementing it wrongly? It could be a bit of both, but I want to leave that question with you. So I've got experience in both the independent policy analysis side, which is where I am now, but I've also got experience working in the government. So I was working in the state government of Selangor after Pakatan took over, and I was there for 2.5 years. And right now, where I am in ideas, I interact a lot with officials within the federal government. So I kind of see both from the inside and the outside. And the two big animals that impede upon successful policy implementation, if you like, would be one, bureaucracy. So the more bureaucracy there is, the more civil service restrictions, red tape that you need to go through, the less likely it is that the policy you set out to achieve will be achieved. The second big animal that becomes a bigger monster is politics. So the more likelihood, the higher the likelihood of politics being able to intrude upon the successful implementation, again, the less likely it is to succeed. It's sort of like, you start out with a recipe, you go into a kitchen to try and cook a dish. And the recipe is wonderful, if you follow every step in that recipe, you will actually get that tasty dish that you're looking out for. But as soon as it enters the kitchen, you've got multiple chefs, people want to put in different kinds of sauces and ingredients, They want to chop it a certain way, and at the end of the day, you come up with a dish that doesn't even resemble closely what the recipe was originally supposed to be. So I suppose that's an analogy of how policy can be sometimes. You have this set of policies, but when it's actually implemented, it looks nothing like what it was set out to be. YB talked a little bit about procurement earlier. I'm glad he touched on that because IDEAS just finished this big project on transparency in government procurement. And this is a highly sensitive topic because procurement is where a lot of people's vested interests can come in. Because government contracts out huge amounts of value of projects, whether it's in defense or in other ministries. It's great that his ministry is talking about open tenders, but even then, open tenders will be very tricky because he talked about privatization. So what we found out in our research and ideas is that any project that has a private element in it, so you're talking about all PPPs, the public-private partnership projects, any elements of privatization within those projects means that these projects do not comply with the Ministry of Finance guidelines for procurement.
And the reason for that obviously is that there are obviously security concerns, and Ministry of Home Affairs has a responsibility and has a not an easy one to safeguard security for the country. They need to ensure that only the right people enter and retain the country. And also they also highlight the interesting thing. So for example, a PR in Malaysia is different from a PR in Singapore. Now, I think many people know that Malaysia is not the best at marketing. In contrast, Singapore is so much better because a permanent resident status in Singapore isn't permanent at all. It's actually just a 5 years pass which gets renewed, which I'm not sure how they still get away with calling it permanent residence, but that's another story. Whereas permanent residence in Malaysia is, in the constitution, permanent. Once given, it cannot be withdrawn. It is then also results in children of PR holders becoming citizens of Malaysia. So maybe not quite what you want really for expatriate retention strategy. So we then had to construct, so they don't want to give up PRs because of those reasons. How do we then still facilitate businesses for ease of doing business? So we went back to the companies and asked them, what exactly do you mean when you say you want to retain? So they said, just certainty of tenure, maybe like Singapore, maybe 5 years retention, maybe the ease of being able to change jobs. Then let the spouses work easily. So then we then had to then go back to Ministry of Home Affairs and say, let's come up with something in between work permits and PRs. So we came up with something called Residence Pass, which basically then is approved for 10 years at a time. It's personal to holder, spouses are also issued one. And so it meets the needs of the businesses on one hand, but also in a sense satisfies the concerns of the Ministry of Home Affairs. And it's a lot of toing and froing, and I think the challenge in policy, and maybe that the reason why it often struggles at implementation, if, for example, as sometimes is the case, someone then decides on high and says, we need to retain expatriate, we just want to make PR easy, it would have just met resistance which have resulted in frustrated implementation if it just tried to be dictated just like that. So what actually often involves is, especially in a government where there are different stakeholders, different concerns. Because it's not, I'm not to dismiss life in the private sector, but in the private sector, ultimately, everything can be resolved by what makes more money. So whatever disagreements between different departments, it can be resolved by what makes more money for the company. But sometimes in the public sector, in the government scenario, it's hang on, how do you balance against ease of doing business, which is economic, against a security concern? There's no real easy trade-off. And so sometimes there's a lot to do with negotiating and then adjusting the policy so that the parties concerned would then embrace the implementation a lot more easier. And so, for many of us, I think in the policy space, we often, I think, have a mantra, don't let the perfect be enemy of the good. And sometimes you need to see, where are we going? What can get us progress? And let's move along that. Because sometimes a policy that has more universal buy-in at least will then get implemented and get us at least along the right track. So that's my personal input on that.
Yeah, I think something that Johan and I share is that we're really interested in policy, and neither of us are politicians. So we just said, like, oh, how are we going to match what Henry said earlier? But the fact is, neither of us are politicians. So, we come from, although we're working in separate places right now, you can see us as sort of the people who are trying to push policy change, but that process is not always easy. You have different interests from different parties, and sometimes we have to deal with the internal political problems of whichever party that we're dealing with. So whether it's within Barisan or Pakatan, and of course there's the extra layer of the civil service as well, which may not be familiar with the way with the new kind of things, the new kinds of reforms that we think would be better for the country. I think that's probably something that we share. I mean, just one more example before we move on. When we implemented the Freedom of Information enactments in the Selangor state government, again, it was very difficult to convince civil servants because they were completely, not exposed to the fact that information can be made transparent. The default of the modus operandi is always that documents must be classified. We're operating under the Official Secrets Act. We should not get any information out to the public because what if they do something with it? What if we lose our jobs because of that information being leaked out? So it's kind of changing the culture bit by bit to show that, as we move into sort of government 2.0, if you like, that the attitudes have to change as people demand more, and it's a culture change that needs to happen, and there's so many different parts of the bureaucracy that would need to have that culture change.
And Johan did touch on this. What are some of the interplays between the government and business? I know you spoke about the ease of doing business index, that previously we were number 8, now we're closing down to number 6. I know Singapore is number 1 in the ease of doing business index. What are some of your experience with this?
Okay, so you know that in the 1990s, Malaysia had tremendous foreign direct investment. We also had a very large percentage of private investment. And then of course the 1998 Asian financial crisis took place. And that's when you see not just Malaysia but many of the other Southeast Asian countries that were affected. The growth rates fell, investment as well fell. But if you look at the charts, the private investment did not succeed to rise again, post 1998. And I think one of the reasons, and the Asian Development Bank has also touched on this, is the fact that we have a very, very large and overwhelming presence of government in the economy. I know many of you are scholars and also sponsored by government-linked companies, GLCs. So I don't expect you to, agree with me, but I think that GLCs can be considered one of the reasons that private investment has not been able to rise to the same levels of the pre-crisis rates. The ADB report actually says that many of the GLCs that are dominant in our economy today are neither natural monopolies nor are they strategic in nature, which therefore means that they should not necessarily have a place. So for example, GLCs form, I think, about 52% of the Bursa Malaysia's market capitalization and 93% of all public utilities, which are public listed. That's huge. So if you look at the top, say, 5 to 10 companies which are listed in the Bursa Malaysia, a large portion of that are all in public utilities, whether it's oil and gas, whether it's in electricity. So the point is that the more government comes into the economy, the less the private sector has the ability to compete in that space. Now, what does that mean? The NEM, which Johan brought up earlier, actually did say that in time to come, government should divest its shares in the economy because to allow for greater competitiveness and for the private sector to come in. But I'm not sure if that's really working. I think it's very difficult for government to pull out when these are the sectors that are doing well for itself. But my point is that as Malaysia tries to move into greater regionalization, greater globalization, it needs to be able to let go a little bit and let the private sector or private individuals, the private sector sometimes is given a bad name for whatever reason, for banking and finance reasons. But when you think about it, it's just about people like us, non-government actors. So that's just the point of view that government is overwhelmingly present in the economy, and that sometimes crowds out the private sector from acting.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that. Johan looks like he wants to reply to that, respond to that.
Yes.
Yes. Before Johan, Johan mentioned about the new economic model and how there's about 60 business opportunities within the new economic model. And I did remember that when Prime Minister Najib mentioned about this new economic model, about 90% is going to be funded by the private sector. Now, Johan, what's with your response to what Trisha has mentioned? Continue.
It would be boring if I agree with everything Trisha says. I do have a particular position on GLCs, which I don't quite agree with Trisha. But before I say that, it is true that for the new economic model to succeed as it's set out in the new economic model, it's very clear that it needs to be private sector led. I think there's no argument with that. And clearly, it is then the government to then provide a facilitative environment for businesses to thrive. I think for that reason, we had incarnations of like Pemuda, which was a body which had representation from both government and private sector. You had people like industrialists like Tan Sri Yong Kong of Royal Selangor and Tan Sri Lingam of West Ports, basically be there to represent private sector. How can we then chip away at some of these bureaucracies, particularly in terms of licenses and procedures? And I think those were definitely instrumental in raising Malaysia's rankings in terms of ease of doing business. But just as Trisha said, sometimes private sector gets a bad name, I think it's also very easy to always bash government-related initiatives. And I think, again, to maybe just echo what EKJ said, do keep an open mind. It's very, I would say sometimes very simplistic to always say, let the market let market forces decide and drive things in a very libertarian way. But I do believe that there is also a role for government. I think for those particularly economics, markets are not perfect. And there are definitely one areas of natural monopolies, which is the reason why naturally then some government companies are in the areas of utilities, which tend to be natural monopolies. But I think more importantly, particularly for a country like Malaysia, government has a role to drive strategic development. You see, in a very sort of, not to suggest that it's some conspiracy from the West, but when you look at economic theory, it always looks at how you must always try to get efficiency at a particular point in time. So market forces will always then reward the one that's most efficient. So you then say something like financial services. If you want to talk who are the most efficient, then obviously it would be, mine's okay, right? Obviously, let's say the Citibanks of the world are most efficient. So we then went for complete liberalization of, say, financial services. So then obviously you then expect to then have global banks like Citibank basically dominate the Malaysian financial system. But that is where strategic development comes in. And for that reason, yes, there is regulation by government that in a sense protects local players. And we're talking about protecting local players, not just GLC banks, but GLC and non-GLC banks. So there's one. Now, even if they're government linked by name, both Maybank and CIMB operate in a level regulatory playing field as private banks. They both do not receive any form of funding or preferential funding or support from government. So in all intents and purposes, we should really be seeing the likes of, say, Maybank and CIMB as private sector. But perhaps because it had the benefit of having received originally funding from large government funds like the likes of PNP and EPF or even Khazanah, it enabled them to reach a scale that enables them to compete at a regional level. And I think that's where there is a role for GLCs in really supporting the internationalization of Malaysia's economy. And because if you just go for pure private, pure market forces, pure private sector funding, it would never have supported it to that level to reach where it is today, where you do have the Maybanks and CIMBs really being a regional player. And the same applies to Petronas. I would be the first, I don't know. I mean, how many of you think having Petronas as a national oil company is a good idea? Well, very few. Oh, okay, I noticed you put up your hand, but your dad's joined. It's okay, it's a private show. Now, if you really compare oil and gas development between Malaysia and the Middle East, I think one very stark difference, and I think one of the great successes of Petronas, is that it's really built up in terms of capacity building, in terms of Malaysians being able to get involved in the oil and gas industry. If you take a pure market forces approach, which is I think what Middle East basically they say, okay, we've got oil, let's just open it up for bids for international oil companies to just come in, they're the most efficient, most cost efficient, come in and just drill the oil and pay taxes. You get what the situation today. You don't really get any people in the Arab world really who have built up that with domestic competency to drive their own oil and gas industry. Whereas if you look at Malaysia today, not only has Petronas built up that capacity or expertise in oil and gas industry, our Malaysians are all around the world doing oil and gas, including in the Middle East. I know that's part of Telcorp's problem, but never mind, we should be proud of that achievement. That we have Malaysians who have been globally recognized to be oil and gas experts. And that only really happened when you had a government-led initiative to strategically develop and providing that, shall we say, umbrella or air cover, as it were, to let infant industry grow and build up that capacity. Agree that some experiments have been less great, and there's a few come to mind. But we've definitely had our successes, which have been quite instrumental in driving our development. And it's no different from what other countries do. And if I recall, because I mentioned about the Growth Commission, a few countries made it to develop nation status. Some of them also did so because, again, they had their government supporting infant industry. So one comes to mind is Taiwan, in building up their electronic sector. Yes, they brought in the multinational like Malaysia, but what they also did is they supplemented it with ITRI, which was their own research, which then spun off their own wafer fabs, which now are the largest wafer fabs in the world. So again, there is a role for government. My basic message is don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. There are instances in where government can support international expansion, the same way in the way the Spanish government provided support for Telefonica in the domestic market to enable them to then become a global champion. We have perhaps provided some support to enable Axiata now to be a regional champion. So there are many instances where government can provide some support to develop strategic sectors. I think the key point is, can we ensure that there's proper governance and management? And I think what has let us down in the past is that some of our GLCs have not perhaps been as well managed, and I think that is something that at least the GLC transformation program the last 10 years has done. But there's a time for private sector, there's also some time for government support.
Yeah, sorry, I also have to respond to that. It's more fun this way, right? I think I agree with you, Johan, that there is a role for government to play a very strategic role when you're developing the economy at its initial stages. And yes, I agree that there have been many successful case studies of Petronas, Axiata. But I think there are also many other companies which you didn't mention, which in the last few decades, because of the very same arguments of having an infant industry grow to become regionally competitive, by using that very same argument, the government has also had to spend a whole lot of money to bail out these companies that actually failed. So, with more than, say, 10 billion ringgit being used to bail out companies that have failed in...
I at least personally believe there is a case for affirmative action. But I'd rather not use the sort of phrase like as though it's like, kasihan or nak tolong. I think it's more really to create a situation where to, shall we say, adjust for inherent disadvantages, or this idea about if it's a race, you want to have everyone, shall we say, racing from the same starting line. I think that is the intention. Now, perhaps instead of getting into the more controversial areas of ethnicity, let me just talk about the gender for women for a change, and maybe because I much prefer talking about women. Now, Now let's look at it in the context of in the situation of women in the corporate workplace. Now there's tons of research to then suggest that diversity, at least for corporate diversity, is good for business in terms of both superior business performance and also for governance. In terms of managing, some people say that if there were more women in the boards of global banks, you wouldn't have had the financial crisis because they're a bit more careful and less risk averse. And so that sort of thing. Now, in Malaysia, we have a situation where clearly the representation of women in senior positions or even in the workforce is definitely below what it should be. So if you look at the workforce as a whole, 38% of the workforce is women, so there's 38% women, 62% guys. If you look at what they call the female labour participation rate, we're only at about 52%, which means that for every 100 women of working age, only 52 are in the workforce, even including part-time. This compares to about more than 80% for the guys. And this is particularly an issue as you plot that participation by age. So you see women in the 20s, there's a peak in terms of labour participation rate. Towards the late 20s, it drops off, and presumably that's also linked to due to family commitments. Now, when Telecom recently, in fact, it was just released a couple of weeks ago, a survey of listed Malaysian companies, and whilst their overall representation of women in the workforce is at about 38%, so that mirrors what the overall national labour force is. When you then move up to top management, it drops down to about only 24% representation of women. And at the board level, it's only 8% women. So very much underrepresentation of women in at least director level and top management, which is why I think Prime Minister then, I think called for corporate Malaysia to really give greater focus to enhance diversity, particularly at the board and management level. So, a policy that was announced some years back is where the government, the Prime Minister, and also followed up by the Securities Commission, announced that companies should target to have 30% representation of women in the boards. It was interesting that when it was first announced, obviously a lot of people criticizing it, including women themselves. But I guess that's also part because they don't want to be seen as just making up a number, and I think that's perfectly understandable. But it's beyond those individuals. I think it's a recognition that, say for example, in the boardrooms of corporate Malaysia today, when it's more than 90% male dominated, it just basically favours the perpetuation of the norm. And therefore, in a sense, it then justifies the need to take some affirmative action to then put it on the agenda. You're not necessarily forcing it, but you're actually saying, look, do pay attention, have targets in order to ensure there is greater representation of women. That I think is started to take some track, there's some increasing appointments and so that thing. But it still is arguably a little bit contentious. But I think there is a strong basis because the reason why the government gets into it is because it's not just basically we're doing because kesian the women because you're not getting the new fare. The government is pushing for this agenda because it strongly believes that if there are more women in top management, more women in the boardrooms of corporate Malaysia, it will translate to better performance of those companies and better governance. In addition to that, you do have the situation that we need talent, and talent, as I mentioned earlier, is one of the key enablers for the country's economy. If the women are not staying in the workforce, then you potentially have a talent crunch. And that's particularly the case when the enrollment of universities, I don't know whether you're familiar with this, but 2013, the enrollment into public universities was 68% women. That's two women for every guy, which is the inversion of the labour force composition. And these women graduate, and that's the future pipeline of talent coming out of Malaysian universities. If these graduate and then don't stay in the workforce, then you clearly will have a talent crunch. Now, at one point, Singapore actually lowered the entry level for men to get into universities. What do you think of that? Would you agree to try to get more women to universities that you lower the entry requirement? Yeah, okay, yeah, good. So, obviously that, I'm a bit surprised that there's very sheepish, at least for sales support venue, what's the discriminate women, no? Okay, maybe something to think about, but now clearly we need to think of how do we ensure fair representation of women, good diversity in corporate Malaysia, and leaving it to market forces or purely free-for-all will not result in the desired outcome. Hence, the reason why government steps in to promote some level of affirmative action to promote greater representation of women. Now, actually, I think there's a lot of similarities between the issue of the women agenda and also on the issue of ethnicity, because I think maybe we need a Malay person to write a book like Sheryl Sandberg's Lean In, because I think there's also an issue of mindset that they need to also step up and take up those opportunities. But I'll stop there.
All right.
Can I say something as a woman, or?
Yes.
Let's get ladies first, now you get to comment as well. No, by all means, please.
You can feel free to comment on me as well. Well, actually, I was a direct sort of recipient of that, of that policy of having women in the boards, because I got a call one day saying that, we want to have women in the boards of these companies, so we want to nominate you as one of them. So why don't you come to our trainings and you can be part of the board of certain listed companies. But I actually rejected that request. I'm not sure if it was a wise decision now, because it would have been great to be exposed to public listed companies, the way they operate and so on. But I really didn't like the fact that that call just came because I'm a woman, and it wouldn't have come otherwise. Maybe that was just me. So I am all for promoting diversity in the workplace. I handle human resources in ideas, and I try and do as much as I can to ensure that the working mothers in my organization get the space that they need, have flexible hours, if your kid is sick, please go home. But when it comes to quotas, I'm a little bit more hesitant, because that quota, as you said, it just simply means that you're calling me because you want to fulfill the number game, and I really felt very small when that call came through. So that's just...
Okay.
I'll answer that later.
Okay.
Marina was feeling right.
Yes.
Can I respond to that? Okay, I'm not taking anything from Marina, your session, but just to be clear, the 30% target for women on boards is not a quota. It is a target, and basically what the government asks is that they ask listed companies to have a target and identify what are they doing to achieve it. Now, yes, it might feel for you a bit strange, you're just calling just because I'm a woman, it seems a bit disingenuous. But I think the point is that if we didn't ask them to start thinking about it, they wouldn't even widen their circles to consider women. And in no way are we saying that it should be just to fill up numbers. We've always very clear, they need to meet the criteria. It is merit-based. I think one of the issues even on the issues of affirmative action for the ethnicity is that we want it to be more merit-based and market-driven. But the problem is that previously, it just because it's a boys' club, let's face it, boardrooms of corporate Malaysia are boys' club. They wouldn't even think of a woman who might be of equivalent stature. So the reason for putting that policy in is just to say you've got to force the issue. Now, if you think of many global companies, many come to mind. Even Shell is here today, Accenture. In their global practices, when there's a senior position of a certain level is opened up for vacancy, they actually require there must be at least one woman candidate considered. So some people say they're just calling that person just for women, but no, it's also to force the issue that you must at least be thinking about ensuring that there is a fair chance for all concerned, that at least people are brought to the same starting line. I think it's important to understand that. And maybe I want to just share one last thing on this point, that I know this 30% suddenly sounds like some magic number. Actually, it's not. The 30% representation of women on boards is a number that's been adopted by UK. There's a 30% club there which now has chapters in Hong Kong, Australia. The idea is that, let's say you take the typical boardroom of about 10. Well, there's only this one lady. Unfortunately, that whatever she says, it'll just be taken off. That's the lady's view. So research has shown that when at least there are 3 women in the room, they then are appreciated in their own right as an individual, as a talent. And it's not just because they're a woman. And so that 30% is to get the dynamics that in each boardroom, they then have reached, for what is said as a critical mass, so that their voice or their perspectives are taken in its own merit. So it's not just to achieve 30% on average, that some might have 60%, some might have 10%. The point is at least get that 3 out of 10 in each and every boardroom to ensure that the benefits of diversity in terms of making better decisions at boardrooms the benefit is achieved.
Well, it's been a very interesting discussion so far. Unfortunately, we've gone a bit over time, and we don't have time for questions. But I've gotten a message from the organizer saying that
Eaten into your schedule, sorry.
yeah. But I'm sure the speakers have time after this for individuals to come up to you guys and ask questions.
Sure.
Yeah. I'm really sorry, but unfortunately we do have to move on. But thank you again to both Trisha and Johan. If you have time for us to just sum up, and it's very interesting to hear from a very diverse point of view. And I do know that you guys are converging towards having a better Malaysia. Why is all this topic very important for you today? Just to sum up.
Okay.
Maybe Johan can start first. Yeah, we start.
It's right. I know. I'm trying to be quite verbose. I'll try to make this brief. I think as I mentioned earlier, I think the reason why Trisha and I are here, and maybe even together, Marina said, I think we really want to get you aware and more involved. I think that's really there. And maybe just to touch on the point which YBKJ said, I think it's really true that Malaysia is really at a critical juncture in its history. It is really at this point in time, it really decides whether or not we will succeed or not. I've got a quote in context of Malaysia's transformation journey. I don't know, can anyone know where this comes from? The quest stands upon the edge of a knife, straight by a little, and will fall to the ruin of all. Anyone know where's that from? Okay, well, it's Galadriel from Lord of the Rings, but I think definitely applies to the journey where Malaysia is. And maybe just I'm sorry, I just came up with this humanly, there's just a couple other quotes. So another one, obviously, Avengers. You guys like Avengers? There's a quote that says, there comes a day where all superheroes to come together to fight the foes that no single superhero could withstand. I'm not just talking about Singapore, but it's clearly that's the point. I think we as a country realize the battle is out there, and the need for us to come together and really work together to get our nation forward. And maybe I'll close on my last quote from Avengers. Who's favorite genders here? Iron Man, maybe? No? Thor. Now, I want to choose actually a quote from someone which probably none of you would choose, and that's Agent Phil Coulson. Because if you guys remember, there's a point when he's about to die, and he says to Loki, he says, "Oh, you're going to lose." And Loki says, "Am I?" And then Phil Coulson says, "It's in your nature." And then Loki says, "Oh, your heroes are scattered, your floating fortress is flying on the sky. Where is my disadvantage?" And Agent Phil Coulson says, "Your lack of conviction." And I think I'd just like to close with you that I think what we all need is a conviction, a self-belief that we're not some mid-table football team, that we're a country that has great resources, great people, and we deserve to succeed if only we can get our act together. And so I invite you to join us who are really keen to make a difference through different ways back in Malaysia.
I think the last few months have been quite difficult for Malaysia. We've dealt with a huge crisis, a great tragedy, but it's sometimes during those periods of crisis that force us to think about big questions, about our purposes, what is the purpose that we're doing what we do. We lost so many lives on board MH370. We've lost several significant lives in the past few weeks as well. People who fought for human rights in Malaysia. There was Irene Fernandez, who worked for refugee rights. YB Kapal Singh, who, very controversial character, I know, but was also very, very principled in what he stood for, as a lawyer, and many others. So I think these are the questions that not just I have been going through in my mind, but amongst my friends as well. So people back home, when we think about the loss of life, what does that mean for the rest of us who remain? What do we need to do to bring back or bring Malaysia forward to its future? Even beyond Vision 2020, let's talk about beyond 2020, because all of us are still going to be alive then, right? Hopefully. No, I mean, what I'm saying is, I suppose this is the time where you can explore and exploit all the gifts that you have and all the talents that you are gaining here. And you are so fortunate to be here. Not everyone has the opportunity to do so. So for people like me, I was studying in UK in Warwick University as well. I went to Monash, but not here. I was in the Sunway campus. But after UK, after coming back, there's a reason I came back. I did want to do something along the lines of social research, and once I went straight in, I kind of jumped into the deep end of the ocean. And the reason is that we do want to see and we do believe that Malaysia can be a better place. Malaysia is going to assume the chairmanship of ASEAN in January 2015. That's very, very soon. And that gives us the opportunity to shine. It gives us the chance to really be a regional leader as we were in the past. And I started the morning session by saying that I used to sing Ella's song, like Standing in the Eyes of the World. And then I heard it again a few days ago because I was preparing myself for this. It brought back all these memories of hope, of optimism, and I really felt like crying because that was the time where we felt so strongly that we could really achieve that. And I don't know what that song is for you today. I'm not sure what is the anthem or the theme that drives the young Malaysians forward, but you have to find that song or that thing that sparks you, that part of passion that makes you want to do something. I mean, whatever it is, whether it's joining government or joining opposition or being in a think tank and becoming a policy geek like me, there are many kinds of ways that you can contribute. And of course, IDEAS is always open to internships or job applications, but my point is that everyone will have a different journey, everyone will have a different conviction, and you need to find that for yourself. Thank you.
Sorry? Oh, cool. Okay, thank you so much.
Alright, 1, 2, 3.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Alright, then. Dia nak apa? Oh, okay.
Assalamualaikum and a very good afternoon to all. My name is Mariam Chandra.
And I am Saiful Ahmad.
And we are here today to present to you this year's winners for MASA Excellence Awards 2014.
First and foremost, we, on behalf of the MASA committee, would like to extend our deepest gratitude to representatives from HSBC, Monash University, Shell Malaysia, and ESO, and also to the National Executive of International Education Association Australia, IEAA.
And of course, to everyone else for being here today. Before we begin, I would like to invite the Director of MASA Excellence Awards team, Mr. Sabri Yusuf Hong, up to the stage to deliver the speech. Please welcome.
And greeting to everyone present today. I am extremely honored as the director of MASA Excellence Award to be given the opportunity to address this amazing crowd of people in attendance for the second MASA Excellence Award. This is the second installation of MASA Excellence Award, which was a great success last year in honoring the top achievers from Malaysia who have made a name for themselves in Australia. This event would not have been successful without our support from our sponsor, namely our main sponsor, HSBC, Monash University, Astro, and Shell Malaysia. In addition to that, I would also like to extend my deepest gratitude and appreciation to Education Malaysia Australia for supporting us from the get-go and providing us with guidance throughout the planning and execution process of MASA. Last but not least, I would also like to thank our study partner, Malaysian Australia Alumni Council, or MAAC, and Leonomy for working closely with us to further improve the quality of second MASA Excellence Award. As one of the 5 main components of MASA, MASA Excellence Award strives to ensure that recognition is given to top Malaysian achievers in Australia with an outstanding achievement in all fields of study. Malaysian with an exceptional academic qualification, outstanding extracurricular achievement, outstanding extracurricular achievement, and a great personal and professional accomplishment are recognized for their excellence in a formal event among other fellow Malaysians, which is in accordance with our tagline of MASA Excellence Award, which is for achievers who deserve recognition. In addition to that, the Excellence Award is Arts and Social Science, Engineering, Science, and Commerce category. There is also an award for the Best Malaysian Student Organisation, or MSO, for the very first time this year. The MSO of the Year Award aims to recognize the stellar effort and various MSOs to promote the Malaysian culture and attaining the welfare of the Malaysian students in their respective education institute. In conclusion, I hope that the future installment of MASA Excellence Award will further improve in its quality and continue to recognize the excellence of Malaysian students in Australia. I, on behalf of MASA Excellence Award Committee, would like to sincerely apologize for any shortcomings on our side. Thank you for attending MASA Excellence Award, and I hope that you have a great time today. Last but not least, I would also like to wish best of luck for the top 4 finalists for each category. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sabri, for the kind words of welcome. Now I would like to invite Mr. Johan Mahmud American, the CEO of Talent Corp Malaysia, to give his keynote speech. Please welcome.
Assalamualaikum and a very good morning, Dr. Jumanti, Education Malaysia Director, Tadi Putita Marina Made, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I'm not sure how the scheduling works, but I promise you I did arrange for this so that I'll be able to track Tricia without the right to rebut. Tempting as that is. But I think, at least particularly Vietnam Corporation, are very proud to be a part of and support particularly this initiative, one that celebrates excellence, particularly excellence in all of you, particularly as top talent representing, and flying the flag for Malaysia. Since you've already heard me speak ad nauseum, I'll try not to make this too long, but I thought in the context of this Excellence Award, I actually wanted just to maybe just touch on a topic, particularly on failure, because I think that was something I had a conversation with a group of students yesterday. One of them asked a question, and I thought it was really appropriate for me just to really share a little bit about my own personal journey and how I think failure is particularly important, and how that ties into that having to just leap the opportunity and persevere. Just to share, when I was going through school, I was the youngest of 4, so I think I was one of those typically lazy boys, and so probably wasn't doing as well as I should. And my parents used to get very upset, particularly my mom. And I know I was then going towards SRP, and we're supposed to be studying and I wasn't. So I think I then overheard my parents arguing with my mom got to nag and scold Johan into studying as well. Because for whatever reason, the nagging till then had no effect on me. But what was the turning point? Maybe my dad was quite cunning, or maybe he really meant it. He then said that, oh, never mind. Maybe Johan just isn't as smart as his siblings. So having been a failure in my academics, that was a particularly highly motivating comment, because there's nothing like trying to prove someone wrong as a source of motivation. So then after that, obviously I then transformed myself into a lean, mean examination machine, and went off and to do a lot better. Culminating in me then, I studied economics at Cambridge and I got first class. Now, that should have been then happy ever after. But the problem with that is that when you graduate with first class from Cambridge, unfortunately, you then end up being sort of an arrogant piece of shit, because you then think you're God's gift to the working world, and surely everyone should want you and greet you with open arms. And I must say that that transition to work initially was very difficult. I really struggled at work. And the one thing I realized was that the competencies that you need to succeed at studies are very different from what you need at work. Because at studies, it's very individualistic. It's just about you. You just want to do your very best for your exam, and it is all about you. And the second part was, you just had to peak for the exam and then get a top grade. You didn't have to keep it consistent. Whereas work is completely different. Because work is really about working as a team, sometimes compromising to others. I spoke about don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Learn very early on that you just really sometimes, it's not about the best idea, but an idea that everyone is willing to support as a team. And it's also about maintaining a certain level of commitment and hard work. And as a result of that, everyone else in my year group got promoted and I got held back. Memang jatuh air betul-betul. I really, so malu. But that was fantastic. Looking back, it was a bit painful at the time, that the pain of failure is such a powerful motivator again. And I think another good thing is that besides then maybe educating me that I needed to be more humble and be a bit more hardworking consistently, it also taught me that particularly at work, you need to find something that you're passionate about. The thing that motivated me to try something else. I was doing audit then for about 4.5 years in London. I came back, that was towards 1999. This was just post-crisis. And I went into corporate finance, which I found to be a lot more exciting than audit, at least for me at least. I did that for about 3 to 4 years in corporate finance. But the one thing as well, as I also want to transition to another point, is that beyond just recovering from failure, it's always more exciting when you can contribute to make a difference. And whilst, when I was working in PwC London, glamour juga lah, you tell what, I work in London. It sounds cool, but in the end of the day, I was just auditing companies which were just in stable state, doing single-digit growth. You don't even want to give them advice, so they've heard it all, they've done it, it's already a well-oiled machine. Your ability as a young person to even make any difference is very limited. In contrast, when I first came back, the first major job I was doing was trying to restructure what is now called MRCB and Media Prima, Astro's major competitor. At that time, they were saddled with 4 billion of debt, and they're basically about to go bankrupt and sell off all of its major assets. And you're there as I was still young, I thought I was young, below 30, and you really feel that, wow, I'm making a difference, I'm trying to save jobs, I'm trying to make a company which otherwise is a good business model continue to thrive. And I think that excitement about being able to contribute then carried on, and I got the opportunity to join government in 2004. I was fortunate to have gotten an invitation to join the Ministry of Finance then. And again, it was really fun because we were able to get involved in annual budgets, coming up with proposals, and that opportunity is something I don't think I would be able to get anywhere else. And so I mentioned that earlier on I get turned on by policy. Yes, maybe that's one of my fetishes, I don't know. But it is something that at least I feel passionate about. I wake up mornings, I want to do my job. It is something that I feel that it's a great thing that it's not going to be the new talent corp mantra, but let's face it, our country does have issues, it does have problems. And so there's actually no shortage of work to try and fix it. So come home. And that is something that there's no shortage of, and you don't need to be necessarily a policy geek like Trisha or myself. Even working in the private sector, leading organizations like Shell, Astro, we've got Zico Law here, apologies if I missed out, PwC, being even a part of Malaysia's key economic engines is again another way of helping Malaysia, I guess graduate from being a mid-table football team to be in the Champions League. It is an opportunity which I think is not only just good for the country, but also good for you to be a part of a growing and fast-changing environment. Of course, I know this is the Iklan dari Penaja from Talent Corporation, but the pitch is, okay, it's not that I'm just going to do a blanket, don't stay in Australia. By all means, if you get a great job in Australia, you get to work for some great multinational, get fantastic experience, international, something that gives you international exposure, something that shows you global best practices and benchmarks. By all means, please stay and get that experience. But if you're just staying back for the sake of staying back, I think you're really selling yourself short when there's so many opportunities at home to make a difference. And I think it's even something I shared yesterday in that smaller session with the student leaders. In striving for excellence, and that's I think the mantra of the award, in striving for excellence, you want to grow yourself as a professional. And so you want to be in an environment, in an employer which nurtures you as a talent and really gets you to grow as quickly as possible. But at the same time, I would then say that it also requires you to not just be ambitious, but also requires you to persevere. Because whilst yes, we have issues, yes, we have problems, and lots of work to fix it, being in, shall we say, a less oiled machine means that it's not easy to drive change. If change was so easy, everybody would be doing it. If doing good was easy, everyone would be a Mother Teresa. But on that note, I'll close you with a quote. So my favorite film is Lord of the Rings, and I don't know, do you remember the scene where Samwise and Frodo were having this dialogue about whether to proceed to Mordor? Anyone familiar? Yes, no, maybe? Yes. So I'd like to, okay, for those who are not Lord of the Rings fans, and I have no idea why you're not. But it's okay, I don't mind mixing with losers, it's okay. But anyway, the geek that I am. So in this scene, Frodo has this ring and he's finding it such a burden. It's so difficult because he wants to do good, but it's proving so difficult. And I'm very confident you will come back to Malaysia and say, alamak, public transport doesn't work, but the system so inefficient, bureaucratic, fast gila. You get your office, your boss is a maniac or whatever, I don't know. So you face challenges and you face difficulties and you feel like wanting to give up. So in this scene, Frodo is really like, macam nak berputus asa. So he wants to give up. And so then he has this dialogue with Sam, his best friend. And so Sam then says, that they are all, in terms of the great stories that we always remember and we get inspired about. It's always about people who overcame the odds, people who had many opportunities to turn back, and yet they persevered. And so Sam then says, they persevered because they were holding on to something. And then Frodo says, oh, what are we holding on to? And allow me to paraphrase what Samwise Gamgee said. I would then like to say to all of you that there's some good in Malaysia and it's worth fighting for. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jahan, for those inspiring words. To give you a brief overview on the selection process of the winners for MASA Excellence Awards, we collected resumes from interested participants for each category.
These resumes were then filtered according to the achievements, and the outstanding ones were then sent to the Malaysian Australian Alumni Council, MASC. MASC reviewed each resume and selected the top 10 resumes for each category.
The top 10 resumes were then sent to the platinum sponsors to be selected as the final winners for each category. The winners will receive a trophy, a certificate of recognition, an iPad mini, and a professional development package.
On the other hand, the MSO of the Year Award was selected by Education Malaysia Australia based on the events conducted by the MSOs in 2013. The best MSO of the year will receive $1,000 cash grant, trophy, and certificate of recognition from Education Malaysia Australia.
Without further ado, we would like to move to the first category, Arts and Social Science. Please enjoy this short video on the top 4 nominees.
Jo Chua from Curtin University. Muhammad Uzamil Khairul. Pauline Lim Wen Jun from the Australian University. Rehana Ahmad.
With great pleasure, we invite Dato' Azhar Haji Nawawi, Vice President and Chief Ambassador of On Air Celebration, up to present the winner of this category.
Our first winner is Muhammad Uzamil Khairul. And the president of the Malaysian Students Association, in which he successfully revitalized the club and increased its financial status. The versatile Muzamil was once a touch football umpire and had previously worked as an intern at the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons in Australia.
Our second winner is Rehana Ahmad Razif from This category has a vast amount of experience in projects which has proven her leadership abilities that suit her undergraduate course as a law student. Rehana, the current deputy chairperson of MASA Australia, was once the deputy head of Republic elections of the first DUC held just last year. As the leader of mainstream media for our first Malaysian Summit of Australia last year, she was responsible for the event coverage in local newspapers and radios as well as publication of articles in Malaysian newspapers. Thank you, Dato' Azhar Haji Nawawi.
Awards are Adam Han On from the University of Queensland. Afiq Rahman from Monash University. Matuvapan Sekar from University of Ed. Woi Shin Tan from the University of Nai.
From Shell Malaysia upstage to present the awards to the winners of this category. For engineering, our first winner is Matuvapan Sekar from our current national deputy chairperson of MASA is undertaking his Bachelor of Engineering at the University of Adelaide. He consistently achieved PhDs in English, Economics and Business Studies while at Indy International College. His personal achievements include being the co-founder of the Speaker program in Adelaide and co-director of the first MASA conference in 2013. He even went on to winning at the Rotary Youth Leadership Award. He was also the treasurer of the Adelaide Indian Cultural Society in South Australia at East University, a society with members of an impressive number of 400.
Our second winner is Afid Rahmat from Monash University. Unfortunately, Mr. Afid is unable to be present today. We kindly ask for a representative to collect the award on behalf of him. Thank you, Ms. Sheila Bala.
Ladies and gentlemen, our next category is Commerce. Please enjoy this short video on the top 4 nominees for the MASA HSBC Commerce Excellence Award.
HSBC Commerce Awards are Muhammad Aizat Abdul Rahim from the University of South Australia. Kuei Fang Xuan from the University of Melbourne. Nurliza Mas'ud from the University of Adelaide. Michelle Chan from Top Education.
With great honor, we would like to invite Mr. Sang Wong from HSBC up to the stage to present the award to the final two winners of the MASA of HSBC Commerce Excellence Awards. The first winner is Nurhiza Masud from University of Edinburgh. Unfortunately, Ms. Lisa is unable to attend today, so
the second winner is Gold Function from the She has shown professional leadership skills through the many programs that she has participated in. She founded and initiated the academic component of MASA by taking the lead as the National Executive Director of Australia of MASA. She is now currently the first year BCom group mentor at the University of Melbourne and also as the campus leader for each coordinator. Thank you, Mr. Sen.
Ladies and gentlemen, our final category is sciences. Please enjoy this short video on the top 4 finalists for the MASA Monash University Sciences Excellence Awards. And the finalists are
Finalists for the MASA Monash University Sciences Awards are Ji Chong Ling from the University of New South Wales, Muhammad Shahrul Fitri bin Zawawi from the University of Adelaide, Wan Daniel Muhammad Nur from the University of Tasmania, Nurul Nadia Muhammad Ghazali from the University of Newcastle,
with great pleasure, we invite Mr. Johan Mahmoud American up to the stage to present the award to the winners for this category. Please welcome. The first winner is Nurul Nadia Muhammad Ghazali from Nurul had worked as a medical intern at the Bangalore Baptist Hospital in India. In the Department of Community Medicine, she performed community health screenings, provided basic health treatment, and promoted proper nutrition to the slum communities. She was also appointed as a research assistant for the Brain Research Institute, Monash in Sandhurst. At the Institute for Democracy and Economic Affairs in KL, she also served as an intern, where she contributed in promoting market-based solutions to public policy challenges.
Our second winner is Muhammad Shahrul Fitri bin Zawawi from University of Adelaide. Mr. Shahrul is unable to join us today. Could you please have
on to the Best MSO of the Year award. The winner will receive a $1,000 cash grant, trophy, and certificate of recognition from Education Malaysia Australia. These are the MSOs that contested for this award.
The finalists for the Malaysian Students Organisation of the Year are Adelaide University. Malaysians of Melbourne University. Malaysian Islamic Society. University of Queensland. Malaysian Youth Society.
For this award, we would like to invite Dr. Junati Ismail from Education Malaysia Australia to present this award to the students.
This is not the optimal screen resolution for the display device. The optimal resolution is 1366x706.
And the winner goes to Adelaide University. Some featured events include Generasi Influency, Badminton Day, Kayaking, Mini AMSA Olympics, Malaysian Gala, and Malaysian Carnival. Students also get to express their creativity through AMSA's photography competition with a theme titled Exam Rules. Apart from that, students are also kept in the loop of the current issues in Malaysia through sessions with R.J. Rahman and various other critical thinking sessions. Thank you, Dr. Jumiat Ismail.
Very short intro, your recent activities that you've been doing and your recent involvements.
Thank you. Assalamualaikum, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, rather. First of all, let me thank MASA and MASA for inviting me here. It's a real pleasure to be able to speak to Malaysian students, even though I have to travel 8 hours to do it, because at home in Malaysia, I've had invitations to speak at public universities in Malaysia, received it 4 times. So apparently I'm a very dangerous person. So I'm quite happy that you all think that I'm very safe. Or maybe not. Mother read out my bio data. I've been involved in NGOs for over 20 years now, working on human rights of the most marginalized people, and also of late as a natural progression, because I realized that it's not just the people on the fringes of society who have their rights denied, it's people at the very center very often because of gender, and very often, unfortunately, also because of religion. So I'm now on the board of Sisters in Islam, an organization that advocates for justice and equality for Muslim women. And apparently a lot of people have problems with that. But anyway. Besides that, other things I'm doing, I'm still co-executive producer of 3R, Respect, Relax, Respond, which is a TV program for young women. We've now revived it again after a short hiatus, and will be mostly online, so you guys get to see it as well if you don't have access to TV3 from here. In addition to that, I've been involved with a group known as Malaysians for Malaysia. It is a news group that is promoting peace and harmony among Malaysians, peace and unity among Malaysians. And we have been organizing events which bring Malaysians together to get to know one another, etc., such as walks in the park. And recently, in the wake of the MH370, the Walls of Hope. Additionally, putting on my most establishment hat, I'm a member of the National Unity Consultative Council, which is a council formed by government, and I'm actually appointed by the Prime Minister, to look at issues affecting unity among Malaysians. And of late, we have been going around the country having dialogues with Malaysians from all walks of life on the issue of unity, which has been a very interesting experience. We're now having roundtables with various groups, and we hope to produce a blueprint of some sort on the issue of unity sometime mid this year, inshallah.
Thanks, that's really interesting. To talk about that further, we'll also get Tuan Syed also to give up a brief intro of what you've been involved lately.
Thank you. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon. We still have not been able to manage the time in Melbourne yet. I still have the Malaysian time here in my watch. Thank you very much, first of all, to the organizer for inviting me. I was afraid that I might be uninvited, but Alhamdulillah, I'm here today with you, and this is a very, I'm honored to be here. We definitely would like to share a lot with all our students overseas. This is something which is a very, very important topic, talking about social challenges. I'm involved with lots of organizations, such that I've been dubbed as a man of many hats by the chief editor of The Star, which actually posts an article in The Star Sunday recently, which was related to the Kajang move. And I was one of the Ibrahim that was mentioned in his article as a man of many hats. And he mentioned that I'm a man of many hats with a confused guy, which is a confused guy. But I think on this matter, I just like to say that perhaps others might be confused about me, but I'm not confused about myself. So, yeah, and I think that it's actually, activists plays that role, you have that kind of labeling done by people, but I think it's important to also note that we actually have a very same principles all the way. It's very consistent. I'm also now involved currently with IKRAM, Pertubuhan IKRAM Malaysia. I'm the Vice President of IKRAM. It's a mass NGO organization with over 10,000 members all over Malaysia. We also have our chapter here in Australia, IKRAM Australia. The President is here, Dr. Harith Rosnila. Can you just stand up, Dr. Harith? And at the same time also, I think IKRAM believes in constructive engagement. We strongly believe that we need to engage in relationships. It is a vehicle for struggle, it is a vehicle for change, instilling goodness in society, nation building, and so on. I'm also currently the chairman of Malaysians for Free and Fair Elections, which is also a very important aspect of meeting up the challenges in Malaysia. In order for us to have democracy, strong democracy, we also need to have a free and fair election system and process. And of course, I'm also the chairman of Gerakan Masukan ISA, or in short GMI, actually I'm already a former chairman of GMI. We have already also abolished GMI. Due to the abolishment of ISA, so GMI also has been abolished. And it's been abolished in 2013, not 2011, but it's just recently.
Sorry, it was the IEC bill that I was talking about.
ISA bill, okay.
Yeah, sorry.
Correct. So on that matter, I think it's very important also that we share lots of challenges. I am grateful that we do have this intellectual discourse, and you also have this intellectual discourse as your key aim or objective of MASCA. So with that, back to you, Madu.
Thank you. Well, we'll get into more details of the discussion today. Talking about social challenges in Vision 2020, the question is, how has Malaysia fared so far in Vision 2020 in terms of social level? When it leads us to ask, as a nation, are we moving forward or moving backwards as we progress? For that, let's look at the first aspect, rise of civil society in Malaysia, or specifically, let's say after G13, where it has been more prominent, and Malaysians have taken up an attitude of saying that, no, we have left behind the attitude of saying, don't care attitude. So we are getting more interested in politics and more interested in the social aspects as well. Therefore, it's of paramount interest that we point out to youths how we can strengthen the relevance of our civil society and what are the roles of civil society in overcoming the social challenges of Vision 2020. Can I get Tuan Syed to start off with?
Thank you. First of all, maybe the very important question to ask is whether Vision 2020 is important. It is, yes it is. I'm not saying it is not. You guys were, oh, okay. Yes, it is very important. But, this is the but, achieving it may not be as important as keeping the momentum going. So yes, we need to have that vision, we need to have that target, but I think what we need to do is actually in keeping the momentum going, that is more important than actually really achieving the target. And another aspect of it is that it is not really the form that matters, it's actually the substance that's more important. And I think we work too much on the form that we forget about the substance. So this is also very important. And due to that, we still have in our midst now social challenges, which, is it real? Yes, it's real. These are real social challenges. For example, we talk about establishing a united Malaysian nation, Bangsa Malaysia. But at the same time, we also understand that, yes, there are more dialogues among civil society groups. Yes, there are lots of young generation now coming forward, asking questions, as we heard this morning, to YDKJ. But I hope that also happens in Malaysia, not just here, But in Malaysia, sometimes you actually shy away. But we need to have those, more groups that are bold enough to actually ask difficult questions, challenging questions. Yes, we have all those, but in fact, there's a strong belief that polarization and race-based mindset is widening. It's not actually narrowing, but it's actually widening. So this is also something which we need to actually note. It is a sense of perhaps we had discussions about whether this is something which is real, factual, or maybe it's just an illusion. But the illusion is real. It's the illusion of distrust, insecurity, fear. That might have been created just because there are agenda or interest behind it. But whether it's something big, I'm not sure. But in my personal opinion, I don't think it's big. And if we are able to actually break that barrier of distrust, fear, I think we will be able to move forward better. Okay, coming back to the topic of civil society, we talk about civil society as a very important aspect of development in Malaysia. This morning we heard about economic challenges. I think we were somewhere up there, but we were not really touching the ground. When we talk about civil civil society, we're talking about real work on the ground, real work giving service to the people, real work about defending the rights of the people, real work about talking about really giving enough capacity so that people can actually develop themselves on their own, empowering them. So to this, I think it is not it's not something which is it's actually happening. True, we see that lots of civil society now blooming. We see a lot of younger generation now involving themselves in civil society, and we see a lot of coalitions even forming themselves, which is a very good positive development. But at the same time also, we are seeing also there are a lot of obstacles and challenges in rising of civil society. You have repressive legislation. You have polarized views about what civil society can actually do. Yeah? You have sometimes also coming in from different sides of the society, hampering what the civil society is doing, and actually labeling them as saying that they are anti-establishment, when in fact they are actually part and parcel of developing a better nation. It is a very important force. It is called a third force. And you need this. Of course, we need the politicians, we need the government, but you need a check and balance. And this check and balance function is being done by the civil society. And I think this is a very important aspect of talking about the rise of civil society. You need to actively participate, you need to address all the issues. And to me, I've been involved with civil society for quite some time. I have no issues on policy makers, Trisha, and also Johan. To me, you need to also understand how you can make policies, but policies should be made based on impact, based on input that you get from the people. What would be a very important aspect of the policy? How does it affect policy? What kind of programs do you actually need that can actually impact right to the grassroots? If the programs are just at policy level, it is just in form when you have lots of one Malaysia, Clinic One Malaysia, Kaya Satu Malaysia, no? But you do not actually give that real benefits to the people. That is something which we need to actually challenge again. So I think this is something the civil society can actually do. And it's a very, very exciting area for young generations as well. And it cuts across religion, it cuts across race, ethnic groups. I've been able to actually engage lots of groups. I would not have been able to actually do that if I was just among our own circles. But we believe that that engagement is required if you want to ensure that civil society works, if you want to ensure that democracy works, and if you want to ensure that we'll be able to achieve Vision 2020.
Thanks, Don. The things I think the very important point that I picked up over here is like the fact that as to progress as a civil society, we need to have a check and balance, and where everyone comes up with every views, and that's when we develop as a mature society. That's a really good point. And to continue on, so how do you think the youth can strengthen the relevance of our civil society and overcome the challenges in Vision 2020 as they?
Well, I think, as Don said, what civil society does is bring forward what we like to call the lived realities of people in Malaysia. Lived realities means what they're actually experiencing, what is the actual impact of policies and laws, etc. Not what you wish it to be. There are so many good intentions, I would say, from the part of the government. They have this law development, but the actual impact, what does it actually mean? So you need civil society to get that feedback, because it cannot just be one way all the time, because then you get the impression that everything works. But in fact it doesn't. It might work for a while, it might change after a certain time. So the feedback is absolutely necessary. And like Tuan says, civil society now in Malaysia is is very lively. There are all sorts of groups. Some are very organized, some are less organized. But they all comprise regular people who feel very strongly about whatever is happening and feel that they now need to voice out. I think we've seen for years what the impact of not voicing out is. So voicing out has become an extremely important thing, and I'm so glad to see that Malaysians now feel bold enough to voice out what they feel in different ways. Of course, there are many, many different ways of voicing out what they feel, of giving that feedback. Not all are very effective. But the point is that this country, Malaysia is yours. And you are a part of it, and therefore you should have a say in everything that goes on in it. So if any of you are told that you don't have to bother about any part of policies or laws in Malaysia, then you should come back and say, I'm a citizen of this country, and that alone gives me the right to speak up and say what I feel about it. And I think nowadays many young people are really aware of this, and I'm really pleased to see that, because I think for too long people have excluded young people from many civil society movements. They felt like, oh, you wait, you'll get your time, and you know, time passes by. You don't know when those opportunities are. And we need young people to give us the feedback, because most of our population is in fact very young. That's the nature of a developing country, and we have mostly young people who are very, very involved in the development. And we are a developing country, not for ourselves, not for us oldies. Somebody on Twitter said I was too old just now, but for you. And I think it has to be a collaboration between young people, because you have fresh ideas, you're exposed to so many things, and us older folks who have the experience and hopefully some wisdom to know, you know, what's going to work and what might not work. So I think there's lots of room for young people, and indeed they are doing many things already in Malaysia. You may have heard of My Consti, which is going around educating people about the Constitution. It's unbelievable how many people don't know what is in the Constitution. There's another group, and I cannot remember what it's called, but they are educating people about gerrymandering. What does it mean? How does it work? Etc., etc., and numerous other groups. So I think one of the issues for young people is that you go back, you start work, you get busy with work, and you feel that you have no time to participate in all these things. I think you have to make time. If you want to have a say, you have to make time for it. To me, it's all a matter of really organizing yourself. I've met young people who said, I really don't care about all these things. I said, great, well, what do you care about? And he said, I only care about pleasing my boss. But if you cannot do what your boss asks you to do, because someone else has found a jalan or a cable to cut in front of you, you can't fulfill your job to your boss. And therefore you're going to feel frustrated and angry. Do you just keep quiet, or do you try and say something about the unfairness of that? So, you know, everyone is affected by all these issues in one way or another, and everyone needs to participate in getting it right.
Excellent. Actually, your quote really reminds me of like what we had in Student Leaders Agenda yesterday when YB Kari was talking about the echo chamber, saying that the feedback, we do not hear back response, we're just probably going to listen to the same thing again and again. And then I think it really resonates well with what we're talking about now. Moving on, this is the second aspect that we'd like to discuss more today. The very first challenge listed in Vision 2020, which is establishing a united Malaysian nation made up of one Bangsa Malaysia. So revisit that basically revisits our education system in a way. So, satu sekolah
141 Malaysia, is the role of vernacular schools are undeniable. They are essential back on how it was formed initially. But with them being separated in every aspect, in sense of religion, language, and more on, is the vernacular school system still relevant for the current and future Malaysia?
Part of when I went around, and my colleagues from the MCC went around for all these dialogues around the country, and we had 18 dialogues. The question of education was one of the #1 subjects. Everybody had something to say about it. And a lot of people were repeating the same thing. If we all went to the same school, we'd all be united. Which sounds great in theory, but I'm not sure it actually works practically. Because #1, look, and I'm a parent, and I have 3 kids, and every parent is concerned about the education that their kids are going to receive. So the #1 priority for any parent is to ensure that the kids get to go to school where there is quality education. And quality education that is going to prepare our kids for the future, to be contributing students, to be good workers, etc., whatever they want to do. It's got to be quality education. But I'm sorry, if you look at the national education system nowadays, it's simply not good enough. And I'm not saying that off the top of my head. You just look at the PISA survey, and our secondary schools are only as good as many primary schools in Singapore or in Vietnam. Why would I want to send my kids to a school like that? It's simple as that. I'm so amazed that when so many people talk about having one school for everyone, they never talk about the quality of that education. Why should we send kids to schools with crappy education? And I hate to say it, but we may have tons of A's coming out of the national schools now, but they're not the same as the 3 or 4 A's that we used to get. Before, when I went to school, I only had 3, 4 A's, which was okay lah, but but I had friends who had 7 A's, and at that time we thought they were geniuses. Now 7 A's is nothing. So that really has to tell you about the deterioration standards. So I think that's #1. That's what makes parents choose schools. The other thing about vernacular schools, well, that's protected in our constitution. So unless you want to change that, and you need 2/3 majority to do that, they are a reality that you have to live with. And let's not forget also that those schools are not necessarily single-race schools either. There are 80,000 Malay kids in the Chinese schools. 80,000. Not as many as Chinese students, no doubt, but there are Malay kids in the Chinese schools. Why are the parents sending them there? For the quality of the education, for the discipline, for things that they don't find in the national schools, and that's a reality. What are you going to do? If you shut those down, you're going to take away the choices of these Malay kids as well, Malay parents. Now, the other thing about it is that going back to the quality of the education, that is to me, that's the single most important thing. Because if you leave it as it is, and I know there's a national education blueprint, etc., but I would dispute a little bit with YBKJ just now about that. Everyone has a say in what that blueprint is. There are alternative reports to that national education blueprint that really objects to some of it and said that their input was not taken in. And these are not just everyday people. There are lots of very high-profile people who have said that their input was not put into the National Education Blueprint. The thing is also, like, we have so many nice pieces of paper in our country. Whether they're actually going to be implemented is a different thing. But what's happening now is that if you have low quality education, anyone who can afford better quality education are just going to move their kids. Only those who cannot afford it will be forced to leave their kids in the national schools. And so you're not going to only get a quality divide, you're going to get a class divide, you're going to get an income divide. How is that serving our kids well? I think it's really almost criminal. And I think the solution is really to upgrade the quality and you can bring in all sorts of languages back into the national school system. They used to have it. They used to have Mandarin classes, and it was only for Chinese kids, and Tamil classes only for Indian kids. I think we should open it up to anyone who wants to learn them. Make them exam subjects, so you have to seriously study them. But I think also the level of English needs to be upgraded. I think knowing your own language, knowing Bahasa Malaysia is extremely important because you come from this country and you have to know it. But the level of English seriously needs to be upgraded. I'm sure you're all here in Australia, so you all speak pretty well. But back home, I tell you, any employer will tell you how heartbreaking it is to try and interview job applicants in jobs where you really need to be able to communicate. Actually, not just communicate English, communicate Malay also. Sometimes cannot explain. And it all comes back to that education system. We are doing a disservice to our own children. And to me, that's a crime. There is no future for so many of these kids. And this is why I think you see so many disaffected kids out there. Kids who are just lost and don't know what to do because that education system has not prepared them for the future. So really, I think we have to go back to the drawing board, change with a will, with a serious will. In fact, I'm beginning to wonder whether we should have any politicians at all in managing our education system, because really it is far too politicized for our own good. And really by now, if we don't see this, if we don't see the damage that we're doing to the future of our country, we might as well give up, just fold out. And because really education is so key to our development of any country. So yeah, maybe with all due respect to the Ministry of Education people here, maybe it should be a different type of structure with real will to implement reforms in our education system.
And that kind of reminds me when you have changes like our system, when we had 2001, we had a new system coming up, and then my year primary schools in Malay, secondary was in English, so we had that changing, now changing back. So this constant chop and changes, which makes it a bit more difficult in that sense. But anyway, coming back to the concern, do you think in terms of vernacular school system, what's your thoughts about that?
Okay, I'd like to start with relating this first to economy. Because you cannot talk about education without relating to economy as well. There is a relationship there. Let's look at some statistics. In terms of Malaysia is ranked in terms of unequal nation ranking. This is a World Bank fact. Unequal nation ranking, Malaysia is ranked at number 39. The lower the number, the more unequal it is. Malaysia is ranked number 39, Singapore is 57, and Thailand is 71. This is World Bank data. Secondly, in terms of the unequal nation ranking in Asia, unequal nation ranking in Asia, Malaysia is ranked as number 3 as the most unequal. Number 3 unequal. Let's look at the cost of living. Now of that, you have, and living in KL, Okay, and 60% of the lowest earning household, 60% of the lowest earning household have only SPM holders as their most qualified household member. They're the SPM section. 60% of that household. You know? So you talk about getting that education. They're not getting that enough opportunity to have that education. And yet, Nelson Mandela once said that education is one of the most important weapons to change the world. And yet, we are not really, looking at education as what it is. I'd like to answer what Manu was asking about vernacular school and all that. To me, one stream can work for Malaysia. I think Manila mentioned that earlier. It's untenable now. It's untenable now. You have so many vernacular schools. You have private schools. What I think is more important is that what we do in schools. What do we do in those schools? That is more important. Rather than having all, the same stream. But what we do in schools, do we actually nurture understanding of different cultures? Do we actually nurture understanding of different religions? Do we actually nurture the understanding of cooperation, collaboration, friendship? And do we actually nurture them to understand that we are all human beings, that we are all nations? So this is a bigger question to me. And to have that one stream is untenable now. We have this, currently we have this initiative. I'm also involved with GBM, Gabungan Bertindak Malaysia. Gabungan Bertindak Malaysia is actually a coalition made up of about 25 NGOs, but diverse range. You have in there KL Selangor Chinese Assembly Hall Association, which is a very big organization. They have under them perhaps hundreds of associations. And they are mostly educationists in nature. Then we have Tamil Foundation. We have Nanyang group. We have also the Japanese Graduate Association. We have IKRAM in there. We have also Muslim Professional Sport Forum. So it's a diverse group. And we have agreed to actually work on a national education reform initiative of our own. We're working together. Yes, of course, the president of KL Selangor Chinese Assembly Hall, who is also the chairman of GBM, is part of NUCC. Mr. Tan said he's actually also in NUCC in Marina. So he's aware about the NUCC's work. But at the same time also, this NERI, or National Education Reform Initiative, is a very important initiative just because we fall back to the concept of first principle. What is first principle? First principle is basically to work on nothing else but a better Malaysia. Forget about the obstacles, forget about what you had in the past, but work forward. What do you think should be? Rather than work on what was in the past. We have gone too much in the past. We're always looking at what are some of the issues or the challenges. But let's look at what we want to do in the future. How we can actually educate our children better and to make sure that they will be able to provide enough impetus, enough drive so that they will be able to have a better vision.
Thanks, Tom Sai. So it was really insightful in terms of the facts and data that you're showing around. In the sense that, not many people would have known that it's 10,000 ringgit and below, it's 96% of Malaysia. It's some really insightful thoughts. Thanks for that. And going for the last aspect that we'd like to think about, discuss in this session. The Challenge 5 in Vision 2020, which states establishing a mature, liberal and tolerant society. I think media maturity is something that would relate well with this subject. And talking about that, so the questions that I'd like to ask towards this is like, what is the current state of journalism and media maturity in Malaysia? And how important is it for the media to create a well-informed electorate in Malaysia?
I think the state of journalism in Malaysia is directly related to the state of education in Malaysia. Completely. If any of you, I don't know whether you get to see it here, but If any of you watched the MH370 press conferences, when it used to be daily at 5:30, I don't know whether you all get to watch it. Malaysians have an advantage because you can understand the questions posed by the Malaysian reporters and then hear the questions posed by the international reporters. And I tell you, during the Malaysian section, which is always first, you all just want to hold your head. Because it's like they don't know what to ask. And my favorite question was, adakah bandar yang lebih dekat kepada tempat search and rescue untuk kapal terbang di Indian Ocean daripada Perth? Is there a nearer city than Perth? Just look at the map, dear. Just look at the map. Yeah. To his credit, Datuk Sri Syamsuddin just sort of looked and said, no. But you know, it says a lot. It really says a lot that the standard of journalism here today. And you know, journalism is not just the mainstream media; it also includes the online media. I don't actually see very much difference often on both. I don't necessarily think that all the online media is better than the mainstream media because they all come from the same education system anyway. But there is more alternative views at least on online media. I'm losing that. What was the last question about how important is it for the media
To create a well-informed.
to create a well-informed public or citizenry? Well, what else should they be doing? I mean, what is their job? Are they there to just talk about gossip, entertainers' lives, and all sorts of rumors, stuff that are not based on facts, or are they part of the development of Malaysia? Don't they have a role in developing a citizenry that is well informed about the issues in Malaysia? How does the media see itself? Really, I mean, if they're there to make everyone dumber, well, they're doing a good job of it. I think that because they have not played this role for so long, people have gotten used to a media that's only there for entertainment and nothing else. And that's a pity because really, media is part of any democracy if they play that role of providing the feedback. Unfortunately, at least in the mainstream media, the media is only talking about things that, it's an echo chamber again. It's become like newsletters because they are all owned by political parties. They have become political party newsletters. And that's only appealing to people involved in the party, really. You don't read newsletters of any organization or business that you're not part of because, frankly, it's boring. They just not play that role, and it's a pity. They're trying, some of them now trying, because there is that alternative of the online media, which is providing different views, sometimes breaking news ahead of them. Some of them are trying by having online versions, and in some cases, for instance, the Malay Mail, the print version, the online version is different. And it's very interesting why, I guess it goes back to the laws that we have, which severely limits what you can print if you want to keep going as a business. And that's something that we really need to get rid of, not unless you want to spend all your life reading newsletters. And newsletters don't help us become mature, liberal, tolerant societies. That's all there is to it.
Excellent. Well, John said, in terms of the media maturity that we're talking about, and also the well-informed electorate in Malaysia, what is your thoughts on this?
I think, firstly, as civil society is concerned, I'm involved with civil society. I think what we actually see is, yes, there are glimpses of maturity, especially in terms of the alternative media. When you talk about reporting things, giving more space for the civil society, yes, politicians, they will take up the most space, because of they are loud enough perhaps, and maybe they can command certain control over things, and so they might be able to actually take up that space. But I'm not seeing more of that maturity in the media, giving more space to civil society. They're asking for us to write columns, talking about civil society, talking about integrity, talking about the free and fair election. But it's not enough. To me, it is simply not enough. And for that matter as well, to me, you also need to provide, politicians will also need to actually, have that maturity to then give their opinions to the press, to the media, that would actually serve and be relevant to the people, rather than to serve and be relevant to their own agenda only. Okay? So, to me, yes, there are maturity there, but there's still room for improvement, definitely. But for civil society, it is a very important vehicle if we want to make change, if we want to have any impact, because civil society works with the mass. You have to work with the people, you have to educate the people, and if you don't have this vehicle, you don't have this tool, you don't have this opportunity to actually express, to get to the wider public, then it's going to be a long walk for us. But to that effect, I think for media itself, we need the media to be more, to cater for what is relevant. What is, to have different point of views. You actually see glimpses of this in TV3 once in a while, in Soal Jawab. I mean, you know that they have perhaps certain certain views that they wanted to actually impress upon. So they do have glimpses of this. They would invite the opposition or sometimes different views. You also have these glimpses in Asro Awali. Asro here. So credit to also Asro Awali for actually having more open, media, and the others as well. But I think whether substance is there or is just like a form, this is the question. If it's really substantive, deep rooted, then definitely it will actually encourage better, understanding of issues for the people. And let's look at, as an example, if you look at the media, or I would say increased proportion, I've written it somewhere, but it's lost. The media penetration in terms of votes. You understand that partly the reasons why we have the results of GE13, where you actually see this real, relations between the rural and the urban. And it is actually a reflection of the media accessibility. Where you have media accessibility well in the urban areas, you actually see some changes happening. People saw issues, they understand it, they were able to actually get exposure to issues, different kind of views. But when you look at rural, and they are actually depending on just the mainstream media, then you see that tendency that there is perhaps not enough changes happening, that they might not be able to actually look at different views, and they are retaining the status quo, and they keep on voting for the same political party or coalition. Okay? So, but as we go along, we are actually going to see that penetration of internet would increase. And when that increase, media would play an even more bigger role when it comes to actually even views, different views to the general public, not just to the urban but also to the rural. And I would like just to touch another thing is that in terms of voters, in the last general election, there were 53% of voters that were 30 years and below. In the coming future years, this percentage will increase up to 60%, and that includes you all. How many of you here are who voted actually in GE13 last time? Can you raise your hands? How many of you have registered as voter but not vote in GE13? Can you raise your hand? How many of you are 21 and above? Raise your hands. Okay, so you see the gap. Some of them may not be even 21 yet, like Akif here is 20 years old. So, I mean, if you look into the future, then you see the reasons why the younger generation will play an even bigger role, and media will be a bigger, important role in terms of changes in political Indonesia.
Thanks, Dr. Sai. With the time running out, we are good for the three teams. We have managed to complete that. We'll just have a short Q&A session in terms of any questions that you want to ask, but we'll have two.
Assalamualaikum and a very good afternoon to everybody. I'm Nur Adila from University of New South Wales, doing Master of International Relations. So I have a bit of background of a semester of course in global civil society, and I'm a big proponent of civil society, and I'm part of it from Malaysia, so part of NGO. But a big critics of civil society itself is civil society is a Western concept in itself, it's a European centric, and many critics are saying that it is actually an instrument itself to impose Western ideologies back into developing countries. So, so how can we balance that out? I mean, like we are taking a concept from Western countries but using it in Malaysia. So how can we, balance within using the concept that has been established in the international arena, but still being grounded to the culture, diversity, and values that we have back in Malaysia? Thank you.
One more question?
On the right.
Sorry, can I get, yep.
Hello, this question is predominantly for you. I see I'm a big fan of yours, so. As a crusader for women's rights, what is your honest opinion about the lack of recognition of marital rape in Malaysia? In fact, there is an exception under section 376 of our penal code stating that the proposed new law that makes it an offense for a husband to cause wife or any other person or any fear of death in order to have copulation with his wife. In another thing, I'm a strong believer of women empowerment and also gender equality. There is a day that I would love to see a woman prime minister, but what is wrong in Malaysia right now is they have no confidence, and I think your program 3R has made me recognize that we women in Malaysia have a standing and strong chances of becoming the next prime minister. But there is a lack of confidence in the women in Malaysia, and I would like to know, do you have any plans for this to actually make a dream come true and to actually realize Vision 2020 in the future? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the questions. I will answer first from Adila just now, talking about civil society and balancing between what we have as a Western concept of civil society and what we have in Malaysia is multicultural, masyarakat majmuk. You have many religions, many ethnic groups. I think there are over 100 ethnic groups actually in Malaysia. Do you realize that? Yeah. Okay. So it's quite diverse. How do you navigate this, civil society in terms of this? I would like to answer it this way. Let's go back to the principles. When we talk about principles, because if we go to the technical, to the details, then you actually run into problems of not being able to reach to any agreement. Let's look at the principles. In terms of civil society, from the Western point of view, they talk about the same thing as justice. These are principles of justice, freedom. You talk about good governance. You talk about integrity. These are the same principles that we apply in Islam, in Christianity, in Judaism, in all. We share the same principles. I don't think that it is different from what you actually see in the Western world when it comes to principles of justice. No one should be detained without trial. Everyone should have a fair trial. Everyone have a right to express themselves. Everyone have a right to actually assemble. These are justice. These are principles. To me, these are common principles. You talk about integrity. No one is for corruption. You are against corruption. No one is for unfair treatment in terms of work, in terms of gender, because of gender. No. I think this is the same common principle that we should apply. Doesn't matter where you are, whether you are Western concept or whether you are Islam, whether you are different religion. In fact, in Islam, we believe in the principles of maqasid. It's called maqasid Sharia, or it's actually what it means is basically the purpose behind rulings. The purpose behind rulings, the wisdom behind it. We talk about preservation of dignity, preservation of property, and it applies to all. It doesn't apply to just Muslims. It doesn't apply to just Malays. It actually applies to all. And we need to ensure that when the problem is not with these principles, the problem is actually in the execution. The problem is actually in the understanding, and we need to do much more of this narrative, understanding, and actually sharing of what are those principles and how it's actually being implemented in different diverse communities in Malaysia and ethnic groups that we have.
Thanks, Dr. Said. Now, I think the second question.
The second question, lack of recognition of marital rape. Was that from our laws that you were quoting from Penal Code? So it's already there. Basically, if generally in our Penal Code we recognize that one person shouldn't do harm to another person, then it should apply across the board. It should apply whether a person is married to them or not. Marriage does not give you special privilege to harm, I would think. Because marriages are supposed to be based on love and partnership, etc., etc. So, yeah, I think it's a problem. At the moment, the Domestic Violence Act, as it is, and as good as it is, and I'm proud to say we're the first Muslim country in the world to have a Domestic Violence Act, implementation is still a problem. And there's certainly a lot of resistance to include marital rape as part of domestic violence, partly because there are people who simply do not believe that it is possible for a man to rape his wife. But if you define rape as violent sex without consent, then I would think that would extend the definition a lot. So it's something that the women's groups would certainly like to see, and we're working towards it. But we're also at the same time trying to work on, getting the Domestic Violence Act better, trying to deal with other things like child marriage and various other issues. So many. But personally, I think we have to get to a point where we stop people from being violent to each other. It doesn't speak well of the country. As far as women as PM, certainly that's something that I would like to see happen. But at the moment, there are lots of barriers towards it. Not all of it coming from women themselves. I think there are a lot of women who would be keen. But there are structural barriers. I know from the BN side, definitely there are structural barriers. In UMRO, there's definitely structural barriers. Nobody can even imagine a woman as the president of UMRO. They were confined to the women's wings. To me, I think they should get rid of the women's wings because they really serve as little playpens. Where you go and deal with your little women's issues there, go have fun among yourselves. And we are the ones who hold the power, right, in the main party. If they're serious about it, it's got to change. By the way, the 30% affirmative action thing for women does not just apply in business. It is meant to apply to all key decision-making positions, which includes politics. And so far, our political parties have made some mutterings about this 30% target for women in politics, but none of them have actually put it into reality. As an example, in G13, only 10% of candidates were women. And therefore, it means, even if all of them won, and in fact all the women incumbents won, in parliament, you can't get any more than 10% in parliament, right? So they're not walking the talk. I'm telling both sides of the political divide, would women like crazy before the elections? 1 million women marched now, 1,000 orang pembaruan lah, and yet when it came to the crunch, neither of them fulfilled the promise. So we women, if we want to get the say, we have to make sure that they fulfill the promises, all sides. There is a working paper on 30% women in political participation, which has been in front of the cabinet for more than 2 years. More than 2 years, no action at all. I don't think they want to talk about it. And if you look at the cabinet now, there are only 2 women in a very big cabinet. So it's less than 30%. And can anyone name the 2 women ministers in the cabinet right now? Nobody? Who? Minister. Minister, not them. Nancy Shukri, who is in the PM's department in charge of law, and Puan Rohani, or Dr. Rohani, who is the women's minister. We have not heard much from them since they got appointed. So I think they put in women, but they put in very tame women, the rest. She put in me, but not like me. But anyway, I think it's not just a matter of confidence in women. It's structural barriers. And for instance, I think women are much more interested in things that directly affect themselves, their families. And that really points to things like local elections, local activities. If we don't have local elections, if we had local elections, that would be the first entry point for many women. So if we want women to come in and get involved in the political process, it's not just a matter of joining political parties. It's actual, getting experience in the battlefield, so to speak. And it very often starts at local council elections, so we have to bring them back. And then just get them going up the rankings to state elections, national elections. It's a long process. But if you're serious and if you're sincere about wanting women in there, I think all the political parties just have to be really put things in place for women to be able to participate. Yeah, I think that. But I think also there are some women who have bought into the idea that's been put out by a lot of men, a lot of male politicians, that women cannot lead. Women should not lead. There was one woman, I think in the Parent State Assembly, who said that a woman could not be Menteri Besar because there are many religious functions that she has to attend, and that Menteri Besar has to attend with the Sultan, and it would be hard for her to participate in those. But surely that's not all of being a madrasah. Surely, you have to deal with the economy of the state, you have to deal with all other issues in the state. And if that's the only thing that's going to exclude women, I really, seriously, why do women do this to themselves? So yeah, apart from that, I don't see, why women should be any less qualified.
Thanks, Lente. And that wraps up our session for today. Apologize for anyone who hasn't been able to ask any questions. If you want, I'm sure the panelists will be more than happy to answer questions later on. They're coming up to you. And that will pretty much conclude our session. And thank you to the Ministry of Education from Yale to Melbourne to attend the event. Thank you.
So thank you, panelists.
Well, we have to try and get Malaysians to have more meeting points, more contact hours together. That can be done at primary school level through programs. If you don't have a single education system, then at least have more activities where you bring students from national schools, vernacular schools together, co-curricular activities, unity camps. We're going to be doing some of that from KBS, Ministry of Youth and Sports. More consciousness about different cultures, different backgrounds, different traditions. That has to be done in earnest, and everyone has to be committed towards this unity and strengthening that new ground.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks. Convention Centre. So this will highlight companies coming into Melbourne, like Malaysian companies flying into Melbourne and having booths and stuff to share what it's like to work in a corporate world with the students. Third, we had the MASA conference, which will highlight prominent speakers from Malaysia, such as YB, Kari Jamaluddin, Wardah Mahathir, and many more that will have a panel discussion and share their life experiences with the students. So the topic for MASA conference this year is Vision 2020, Reality or a Dream. Yep. And after that, we also have our MASA Awards, which is basically to recognize and reward the top achieving students of each industry, namely engineering, science, commerce, and arts and social sciences. So this is the most prestigious award for Malaysian students studying in Australia. And finally, we have our MASA Games, which is 2 days of competitive sports where we are holding 12 different sports this year, and athletes from all around Australia will be flying into Melbourne to compete in MASA Games. So that's basically the overview of MASA.
My name is Johan Kamal Hamidun, and I am the National Chairperson of MASCA. My hope for MASA is that for it to be a platform for all Malaysians in Australia to be part of. As MASCA, or also known as Malaysian Student Council of Australia, is an organisation for all Malaysian students in Australia. We would like to encourage MASA to not only be organised by MASCA, but in hope that in the future, all the different organisations in Australia for Malaysian students will join to collaborate and organise an event for everyone in Australia. It is also hopeful that in the future, Malaysian students from countries such as New Zealand might even come down to MASA to be part of it.